We all know football season is the greatest time of year, but drafting season's a very close second. So whether you're drinking and drafting with your boys for your annual home league or preparing for your next high-stakes draft, the top priority remains the same: winning, and more specifically, winning money. And what better way to do that than by drafting a beauty? That's why you've got to check out our brand new draft kit at Awesemo.com, created by experts who have profited over $7 million playing fantasy sports. These guys are going to help you crush your drafts this year with tools like the Draft Wingman that's powered by projections from the #1 ranked daily fantasy sports player in the world, Awesemo himself, and includes a one-of-a-kind recommendation engine that takes into account your prior picks to ensure a well-rounded team and optimal draft. Draft Wingman is also outfitted with best ball-specific recommendations, including our stack highlighting feature, which helps you complete your all-important best ball stack. If you're looking for more details, or maybe you're already down to join us for an incredible NFL season, click the following link and use the promo code WR, that's WR, to get the entire draft kit for only $9.95. We'll see you over there. Yo, Dave Loughran here with another super important video to get you prepped for your drafts. Now, I know that we love taking risks in fantasy football, especially in the later rounds where we're hunting down that untapped upside that's going mostly overlooked. Quarterback is a perfect position for that, especially this season with so much depth in the back end of the draft, and especially in best ball leagues where risk and uncertainty are totally your friend. You're trying to win a large field tournament, right? You're not trying to take home the trophy in a 12-team home league, even though this video is also 100% for you as well, so don't go anywhere. But in best ball, your natural strategy has to change. And this video isn't specifically for best ball either, but July is best ball drafting season. And that means that Underdog Fantasy has two huge tournaments drafting right now. One with over $1 million to first place and a $3.5 million prize pool, which is the biggest in best ball history, and another with up to $50,000 up top and only $5 to enter. I've absolutely loved drafting over there at Underdog, and there's no doubt that if you're not already over there, you're going to love it too. Use the promo code Awesemo when you get started. That's AWESEMO. You'll get $25 when you sign up and deposit. Head over to Underdog Fantasy, use that promo code Awesemo, get your $25, and start drafting today. You're going to love it. Now let's get to our top 6 late-round quarterbacks to draft in 2020. But before we do me a favor, if you don't mind, if you've enjoyed these videos and you think they've helped you out along the way, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and leave a comment on what you think about the players on this list. I read all the comments, I respond to all the comments, even if they're not so flattering. Let's get into it. Matt Ryan has attempted 600-plus passes in 7 of his last 9 seasons, and has finished with at least 25 touchdowns and 4,500-plus passing yards in all but one of those years. And while he's had a couple disappointing campaigns along the way, Ryan has been a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 8 of his last 11 seasons, and has clocked quarterback 12, 7, 2, 14, and 3 performances over the last 5 years. Another thing about Ryan that often goes overlooked is his ability to stay healthy. Ryan has missed 1 game since 2010 and 3 of a possible 208 games for his career. So while Julio Jones is no longer in Atlanta, Ryan will still be equipped with some excellent pass-catching options in Calvin Ridley, who I think could legitimately finish as the wide receiver 1 this season, but definitely inside the top 5, and Kyle Pitts, who became the highest selected tight end in NFL draft history just a few months back. Russell Gage is a respectable third option in the passing game, and Mike Davis is a perfectly capable receiver out of the backfield too. Ryan led the league in passing attempts last season, was 4th in yards, and 12th in touchdowns, and that was with Jones completing only 7 games. Ryan was also 3rd in red zone attempts and targets to the end zone. And with 2 serious threats inside the 20 like Pitts and Ridley, who caught 7 of his 9 scores inside the 20 last year, there's reason to believe Ryan could easily cross the 30 touchdown threshold again this season. Ryan is currently the 17th quarterback going off the board.
It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive and a massive slate here to talk about nearly every single team in action today. And Adam and I have not yet talked about this slate today. A lot of days we do the Deeper Dive and we do the strategy show together, and it's kind of like, hey, we're doing the same show with all the same beats twice in a row. But it's going to be different. I haven't heard your takes yet, Adam.
Yeah, it's nice doing a different show. It gets a little bit repetitive when we have the same one back to back.
Yeah, so every once in a while, the ownership is mixed up, but yesterday was not the case, where we basically had to do the same exact show twice in a row, where the ownership was essentially the same in the morning it was in the afternoon, and then it ended up being a fairly crappy slate. I don't know how you did on it. For me, it was just I basically gave into the rake. I didn't get totally wiped out, but I didn't have any lineups that were worth rooting for in terms of like paying attention to the end of the slate. There was no one stack that went off. All the pitchers was kind of a mess, so hopefully a little bit better of a slate today, more fun results at least, but a lot of games, a lot to talk about, and we could jump right in. First game on the slate, once again, we have the Pittsburgh Pirates against the Arizona Diamondbacks, a game yesterday that both sides were pretty chalky and ultimately ended up being, fair results on both sides, but nothing really went crazy. In terms of today's slate, Madison Bumgarner is very cheap on DK, and against Pittsburgh, I kind of wrote off Bumgarner a little bit. He's bounced back a little bit, and I kind of think he has some signs of life and something I thought that he was totally done like 2 years ago at this point. In a matchup against the Pirates, I actually don't mind getting to Bumgarner here. Yeah,
Madison Bumgarner is in the deep dive article. I would bet this is the first time he has ever been in one that I've written, at least in the last couple of years. It's just a good matchup, and he's not getting much ownership. It's actually down from this morning. He was at 13% on DraftKings. Now he's down to 8%. I think it's a pretty good spot. I mean, the Pirates have a kind of high implied run total for Pittsburgh, but overall it's still one of the lower ones on the slate at 4.2. It looks like it's supposed to be pretty warm in Pittsburgh, but other than that, I don't really think there's much working against Bumgarner here. The Pirates' active roster has the worst WRC plus against left-handed pitching. Granted, tonight's lineup maybe is a little bit better. You have Michael Travis leading off. He hasn't been on the Pirates most of the season, but it's still not a particularly good lineup. And Bumgarner's not a terrible pitcher. He's kind of just average to slightly below average at this point. 21% strikeout percentage, 4.65 xFIP, but really favorably priced. I think it's not like we're talking about an $8K or an $8,200 Bumgarner. I kind of just feel similarly about him as I did to Kyle Hendricks last night, which sort of was a mediocre result because he had a rough first inning. But it's the same kind of thing. It's not a pitcher I normally like. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts on his own, but he is in a really good matchup. He's not getting crazy amounts of ownership, and the price tag I think is where it should be.
Yeah, and one other thing I'm going to point out about Bumgarner, he has a 4.06 ERA this year, 3.97 expected ERA, 4.07 FIP. So overall, those results are, kind of whatever. But the other thing, too, is I think there is a lot of reason to think he should be a guy who typically outperforms his peripheral stats. His career batting average on balls in play is 283. So even though it's a 267 this year, it's not that crazy out of line because he's had a sub 300 BABIP every single season of his career since 2011. So he's just a guy who generally does a good job at the balls that are put in play against him don't lead to a lot of hits. So to me, Madison Bumgarner still showing a little bit of signs of life. Maybe somebody who the Diamondbacks are able to get just enough performance from this season. They're maybe able to move him and get off that contract in the offseason. Bumgarner against the Pirates today, considering that the amount of SP2s I like today are not really all that many, and some of the ones I do like Andrew Heaney, are pretty risky. Bumgarner's somebody who I don't mind getting to. On the other side of the game for the Pittsburgh Pirates, it's going to be JT Brubaker on the mound. Once again, another pitcher who I don't really mind. There are some concerns sometimes about the length in the game that Brubaker is going to pitch, but he's only $6,700 on DK. He only is picking up 4.2% ownership. As far as low-owned GPP options, Brubaker and Bumgarner are both guys I'm willing to get to overweight to the field.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I have to pick one, I feel a little bit better about Bumgarner, but we've seen Arizona's implied run total come down a bit since this morning. Their lineup is pretty bad. Just not a very good lineup at all. And JT Brubaker overall this season has been decent. 4.05 xFIP, 23.5% strikeout percentage. He's had home run issues, in particular 2.17 home runs per 9. But this isn't a great park for power. It's not a Diamondbacks team that has a lot of power. Brubaker has had some difficult starts recently, but also not the easiest matchups in those starts. Faced, I think the Reds, the Cardinals, and the Dodgers. Didn't pitch very well in any of them, but I still think it's 6,700 and low ownership, worth a shot if you're playing a lot of tournament lineups. Probably not someone that shows up for me in my top 3 or anything like that, though.
No, it's just he's a 4% on pitcher. If I'm like 7 or 8%, I'd feel pretty good about that. As for the offenses in this game, neither one of them look all that appealing to me. Do you feel any differently?
No, it's just two bad offenses. I think on the Pittsburgh side, Brian Reynolds at 4,100 still going to look pretty good. I think Michael Chavis is a decent play. He's 3,500 with first base and second base eligibility on DraftKings. Second base isn't a very strong position today. For example, the early build of my DraftKings cash lineup had Luis Garcia from the Nats as the second baseman. That kind of just tells you that it's a position where I don't think there's a whole lot to get to. So Chavis leading off probably is a reasonable option. Brian Hayes is always fine, but overall, just not really on a 14-game slate, just not a spot I'm really looking to get to.
All right, next game we have here, it is the Baltimore Orioles. Spencer Watkins on the mound going up against Dylan Bundy for the Angels, a former Orioles pitcher. Now, starting with what to make of Spencer Watkins and how to approach Angels stacks, as all of the windows I have on my computer just closed themselves. Spencer Watkins has not been good this year. The Orioles also have one of the worst bullpens in baseball. So generally, whenever we're in a spot where we're going up against the Orioles and it's not one of their we'll say anybody who isn't John Means, typically, it's generally going to be a good spot for the offense. However, a massive amount of ownership going to the Los Angeles Angels today, 21% projected ownership on FanDuel. That is a massive number when we have a slate with this many games. Then over on DraftKings, the Angels projected for 14.6% ownership. Not as lofty as the FanDuel number, but certainly higher than what their odds being a top stack are. So how are you going to approach the Angels in a really strong matchup with a lot of ownership?
Yeah, it's a situation where I think the Angels are in a really, really good spot, and I want to get to them. You just have to be aware of who else is in the lineup with them. So I still expect to get to plenty of Shohei Ohtani. I think he's one of the best hitter options on the slate, but I'll probably be doing a little bit more of mixing a couple of Angels into 5-man stacks from lower owned teams, as opposed to just playing a bunch of 5-man Angel stacks. I do think there's a chance, though, that our aggregate ownership projection on the Angels comes down in the next update, because right now we have Justin Upton projected for 27% ownership. He graded out as a really, really good option, except he's not in the lineup anymore. So I don't necessarily think that all that ownership just goes to Joe Adell because Adell's batting 8th. I don't think it all just, goes to David Fletcher or Phil Gosselin. So I think the Angels aggregate ownership may come down a bit and give us a situation where, like, Jared Walsh is really popular and he should be. Shohei Ohtani is really popular and he should be. But then you get lower owned guys towards the bottom, like Brandon Marsh, Joe Adell, Max Stassi, so that the total ownership of a 5-man actually isn't that unappealing.
So some updated ownerships here on some of those back-end guys right now. We do have Brandon Marsh is projected for 3% ownership. Juan Lagares is projected for 3% ownership. Joe Adell also only project for 3% ownership. I don't feel great about any of these individual guys. And Joe Adell has been awful so far during his time in the major leagues, both this year and last year, although he goes down to the minor leagues and he just crushes there and shows the outlook of somebody who should be a good fantasy performer with home run and speed upside. Given the matchup, though, I like getting to guys like Joe Adell and Brandon Marsh. It's, one, a good way to save salary and create upside. And then number two, if you do want to make a popular Angel stack, this is a good way to reduce some of that ownership share. Shohei Ohtani is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% owned today. That is super popular for any one individual hitter. However, in a stack, if you're going to be mixing with some of these lower end guys at the back of the order, I'm willing to get to them. So Joe Adell, now that he's projected for 3% ownership, what do you make of him as a tournament option?
Yeah, so we updated the ownership and the top stack tool as I was talking, and exactly what I was talking about happened. Now we have Ohtani at about 30%, but then the next highest owned guy on the Angels on DraftKings is Walsh at 14.5, Stassi at 11. The Angels top stack ownership went from about 14% to like 11%. So I do think it makes them a more appealing stack. I think this is a very good spot for guys like Brandon Marsh and Joe Adell because they haven't been any good at the major league level. They strike out an absurd amount of the time, but this is a park upgrade for them. And they're facing a AAA pitcher. Spencer Watkins is not a major league pitcher in any sense of the word. He's just a guy that Baltimore is using because they don't want to burn up service time on their actual good minor league pitchers, and they don't have any actual good major league pitchers. So Watkins gets to spend a little bit of time in the majors, make a little bit of extra money, and then get kicked to the curb next season probably. So it's a good spot for those guys, and the ownership will be low because they're towards the bottom of the order. Max Stassi has power for a catcher, so I like him. I think Ohtani and Walsh are two of the best plays on the slate. So one thing that stands out, Watkins has actually been better against lefties than righties, but it's still a small sample. I don't expect that to continue going forward. I think it's a lot more likely that Watkins just ends up being bad against all major league hitters than that he continues to hold lefties to a 116 expected ISO. I think Ohtani and Walsh are still in a good spot. And then he's just gotten lit up by righties so far. 294 expected ISO, 11% strikeout percentage. Taking someone like Joe Adell that has power but has major contact issues, putting him up against a pitcher that strikes out 11% of right-handed hitters in Camden Yards seems like a matchup for success for Adell.
Yeah, and just like on DraftKings, the Angels ownership has also come down on FanDuel. They're still the most popular team on the slate, but there's a big difference between a team having 16.5% aggregate ownership and over 20%. So, yeah, Justin Upton not being in line. And also at this point in his career, it's not like Justin Upton is some terrific hitter. It's not like he's one guy who should drastically change your outlook on the Angels. So, if anything, just the fact that it's reduced the ownership share so much, it does make the Angels look more appealing, in my opinion. And then on the other side of the game, the Baltimore Orioles going to be going up against a pitcher in Dylan Bundy, who is a little prone to giving up home runs, gives up a lot of hard contact, was once a former top prospect in baseball, arm injuries and whatnot, just never really quite panned out, even though it looked like he was going to turn it around a couple of years ago. He's not been that guy this year. So the Baltimore Orioles are picking up a bunch of ownership today and are now up to 7.7% ownership as a team. Overall, it's a good spot for Baltimore, but I don't think they warrant this kind of ownership.
Yeah, agreed. I think that there's some good individual spots. Cedric Mullins in particular looks really, really good because not only is he just good, but we know Bundy gives up home runs. Coming into Camden Yards isn't likely to fix that. But Dylan Bundy is also graded out as a below average pitcher in terms of preventing stolen bases every season since 2018. Cedric Mullins has 22 stolen bases this year. It would be very, very surprising if he gets on base and doesn't run on Bundy. So not only do you have the home run upside for Mullins, it's also a very good stolen base spot against Bundy. So I think he looks great. And then, guys like Mountcastle, Mancini, Santander, who's really cheap. Hayes is back and he's cheap. There's still power in the Baltimore lineup against a pitcher that gives up power, but the Orioles are, I think, projected to be a little bit overowned in the aggregate. So it's more so, mixing those guys individually. Whereas with the most recent ownership update, I think the Angels are a little bit easier to stack. Baltimore, maybe not quite as easy, but at the same time, Hayes 5%, Mancini 4% projected ownership right now. So there are still ways you can get to this team and save some ownership. For example, Trey Mancini projected for half the ownership of Ryan Mountcastle because Mountcastle is a little bit cheaper. But that's one spot where, if you just play Mancini instead, you're getting a more contrarian Orioles stack.
By the way, one other note on Cedric Mullins, just because the wins above replacement stat, which by the way, doesn't necessarily correlate to fantasy upside, but Cedric Mullins has been one of the best hitters in baseball this year and just doesn't really get considered that way. But here are the wins above replacement leaders in the American League this year. Shohei Ohtani's number 1. Vlad Jr. is 2. Marcus Semien 3. Sander Bogarts is 4. Cedric Mullins is 5. He's been about as valuable as anybody in baseball this year. So, yeah, I mean, he's somebody who we don't think of as a star type player, and who knows if he's going to continue this next year. But at least for this season, he's been really good. He's going to be somewhat popular as a one-off play, but still, I don't mind getting to him in tournaments, cash games. He would also be somebody that's a pretty high priority for me. So certainly the Baltimore Orioles as a team, I think it's a little bit too much ownership, but I agree with you. Cedric Mullins is a one-off, is one of the better individual hitters that we have to look at.
Yeah, agreed.
Next game here on the slate, the Philadelphia Phillies at home against the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, I'm going to start by talking about Drew Rasmussen, who's going to be opening for the Rays, and then the Phillies offense. To me, it's just a spot I don't really have all that much interest in both sides. It's going to be another one of these bullpen spots that you and I talk about a lot. And a lot of them are the Rays as well, because the Rays do implement these kind of games a lot. I don't think Rasmussen's going to be working super deep into the game. And then also the Rays have a good bullpen behind him. So to me, there's nothing to target from the pitching side of the Rays, but then it also really limits what I expect to happen from the Phillies offense.
Yeah, same for me. And Rasmussen has been stretched out a little bit more recently. I think it's likely you get somewhere around 4 innings from him. And that's not very appealing for the Phillies. He has about a 26.5% strikeout percentage in his starts so far this year, through 56 pitches his last time out. Still not expecting him to go deep enough where I'm looking to get to him at $6,800 on a 14-game slate. But I think it makes it a pretty unappealing spot for Philly.
Yeah, and then on the other side, starting for the Phillies, it's going to be Ranger Suarez. And I mean, another fairly nondescript pitcher who I also don't expect to work super deep into the game. We've seen him stretch out a little bit, but in terms of length, we generally don't see him pitch a ton of innings. So how deep are you expecting him to work into the game?
I'm expecting around 5 innings from him. 82 pitches 2 starts ago, 86 last time out. The really big question for me is, what exactly is he as a starting pitcher? Because he's been good in a relief role this year. And then so far in his transition to a starting role, we've seen the strikeout percentage just fall off of a cliff. He has only struck out 17.5% of hitters as a starter. He has a 15.9% walk percentage. He also has not allowed a home run yet as a starter. So it's kind of like he's been okay at preventing damage, but it seems like it's just a matter of time before he starts really getting in trouble. And that's not really surprising when you see a pitcher go from a back end bullpen role to having to go 2 to 3 times through a lineup. And then you get a lineup as dangerous as Tampa Bay, getting a positive park shift going into Citizens Bank. Suarez certainly could just kind of magically work his way through this lineup and have success again. But I think it's a really high upside spot for Tampa, given the uncertainty around exactly what the long-term outlook is for Suarez as a starting pitcher.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point you bring up too about, hey, we don't know what this guy is as a starting pitcher. And if you look at some of his numbers in the minor leagues, they aren't all that great as a starting pitcher down there. We don't have minor league numbers for him this year, but the last time we saw him as a starter in the minor leagues, it was only a 7-start sample size. But in 2019, 7 starts, 38 innings, he had a 5.68 ERA and a 5.78 FIP. That is pretty alarming. And then, like you said, also the drop in strikeout stuff, which is to be expected when somebody transitions from a bullpen role to a starting role. Then you go look at the aggregate ownership for the Tampa Bay Rays today, only picking up 1.8% ownership as a team. This is looking like a pretty appealing tournament spot for me.
Yeah, completely agreed. They lose the designated hitter, which obviously isn't great, but you still have a lineup that you can just stack so many different ways, because clearly Randy Arozarena and Nelson Cruz at the top of this order are going to look good. But even going towards the bottom, you have a $2,700 Manny Margot. That's a very reasonable value option. Mike Zunino is one of the better hitting power catchers in the league. If you're just, looking for a home run at a weak position. Austin Meadows hitting 7th. If you're thinking that Tampa Bay is going to get to Suarez, you're not really concerned about the lefty-lefty matchup all that much. And it's not like he's going to get ownership. So I still think it's a good spot for Tampa, major park upgrade for them as well. They're not, as long as they're not really pulling ownership, I like getting there, because again, I'm not positive it's a good matchup. Suarez could be fine. He's had some success so far, but I think that there's a good enough chance that he ends up just not being a very good starter, that combined with the fact that nobody else apparently wants Tampa makes me really want to get to them.
And we do have a home run call in the YouTube chat. Aaron Hines is saying Nelson Cruz, 2 bombs. We missed a little bit yesterday. Somebody called for Brian Reynolds to have 3 home runs today. He did not quite hit 3 home runs, but I don't think there's many players that are more likely to homer today than Nelson Cruz. So I don't mind calling him out as a home run play. He is the most popular hitter in the Rays lineup today. That's only with 5% projected ownership. On the whole, this is going to be a team that's basically unowned by the field. And considering that we don't know, like Adam said, what Ranger Suarez is, this is also a hitter-friendly park in Philadelphia. I think this is a good spot to get overweight to the Rays as a team that's only picking up 1.7% ownership. This is probably, let me just look at some of the other ownerships right now. I think this is my favorite, just really contrarian stack today. Is that reasonable to say?
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah, I think the Rays are probably going to be a team that I definitely want to build around. So people are wondering later and just asking, what are you guys' favorite stacks? For me, I'm going to say right now, it is going to be the Tampa Bay Rays. Next game we have here on the slate, the Toronto Blue Jays at home against the Chicago White Sox, and 2 pretty high upside pitchers on the mound in Jose Berrios and Dylan Cease. Obviously, neither of them are in great matchups with the White Sox, and the Blue Jays offense is going to be in play. But which of these 2 pitchers do you prefer as an option?
I prefer Berrios just because I think there's a little bit more in the way of strikeout upside against the White Sox than there is against Toronto. It's a dangerous matchup for both pitchers, but with the White Sox, for one, you don't have Tim Anderson in the lineup, so it's a little bit weaker lineup when you replace him with Danny Mendick. But you also just have more strikeouts there as you work your way down the lineup. With Toronto, not only do they have tons of power and the ability to just light up any pitcher, they're a really difficult team to strike out. They have one of the lowest strikeout percentages against right-handed pitching in baseball this year. So C certainly could still get it done on his own. He's got very good strikeout stuff, but I think it's a similar spot for both guys in terms of it's a scary matchup, but I think it's a little bit better for Berrios just because the White Sox do strike out a little bit more. Greg is frozen. So also, it's kind of similar to the Blue Jays White Sox game yesterday, I think, where you had 2 good pitchers going, but you also still had high upside spots for these teams. Toronto is kind of an interesting stack to me whenever they're going to be low owned just because they have so much power. But on a slate this big, I don't anticipate getting them nearly as much as I did yesterday just because the opportunity cost is higher.
All right, my internet cut out for a split second there, so I didn't totally catch what you said, but I kind of got the gist of it. But here's one thing I'm going to add also. In our MLB top player props tool, we have Jose Berrios. His over-under for strikeouts today is 5.5, and we actually have that as one of the better bets on the board. 18% ROI on over 5.5 strikeouts for Berrios. And you did say earlier that Berrios, you thought it a little bit more strikeout upside than Dylan Cease does. So with that in mind, 5.5 strikeouts, is that a number that you would lean towards the over with?
Seems about right to me, I think. Yeah, that's I wouldn't bet it. It just seems about where I think it should be.
Jose Barrios, by the way, in terms of ownership today, we have him only picking up a 5.9% ownership share and 11.6% chance to be a top 2 pitcher in our top pitchers tool. So he does grade out very favorably from a GPP standpoint, just based on the ownership. Obviously, the matchup is going to be less than appealing, but still the ownership, I think, makes it worth getting to Barrios. Now, in terms of offenses, I'm not sure if you mentioned this because it was when I was cutting out, but do you like either of the offenses in this spot?
Yeah, kind of mentioned it, just that I think it's a really similar spot to yesterday where we had good pitchers and there's still very high ceilings for teams like Toronto. The thing that's going to make it more difficult to get there today, though, is just that because there's 26 other teams on the slate outside of this game, the opportunity cost is higher, and you're going to be able to find low owned stacks that have just a little bit better chance of success. For example, we just talked about the Rays. They're projected for very similar ownership to Toronto. I would much rather be getting to the Rays before I get to the Blue Jays against Cease. So I'm never going to tell anyone, don't roster low owned Blue Jays in large field tournaments because this team does have so much power. But at the same time, I think you can get similarly owned teams that are in better spots tonight.
Yeah, apparently my camera was spazzing out a little bit too, but yeah, I don't know what happened. Just my internet kind of cut out for a second, and then there's kind of this weird lag thing that happens online too, where any kind of movements you make or anything, it just catches it all up at the same time. So I think I was like moving in fast motion or something. There was the other time too where my words got really slowed down, and all of a sudden I was talking really fast. That happened a couple of months ago, but whatever. Everything seems to be back working now. The wonders of technology and the internet, but. Next game we have here on the slate, it is the Boston Red Sox against the Minnesota Twins. Tanner Houck's going to be on the mound for Boston. Now, earlier in the day, they sent Duran back to the minor leagues. They called Houck up, so he has a spot on the roster to make a start today. I found him really hard to break down this year. He's a very talented young pitcher. We've seen a lot of strikeout upside from him. He's going up against a Minnesota Twins lineup also that can generate a lot of strikeouts. So overall for the year, he does have a 31.9% K rate up in the big leagues. In the minor leagues this year, a 28.9% K rate. So there is pretty significant upside in terms of strikeouts, but how deep do you think he could work into the game today?
Yeah, that's the big question. I'm expecting 4 to 5 innings from him. He threw 4 innings in his most recent start at AAA. I believe I'm pulling that back up now, but 5 innings in his most recent start at AAA. In his most recent major league start, he didn't throw that many pitches. He threw 58 pitches in 4 innings against the Yankees, but prior to that, he had gone 89 pitches in 5 innings against Tampa. So I think, wait, is this right? So he pitched the 17th against the Yankees, and then, that's the wrong page. Okay, sorry. 4 innings, the 17th against the Yankees. He didn't make a minor league appearance since then. So that's his most recent outing, is the 58 pitches against New York on the 17th. But on the 12th against Tampa Bay, he threw 89 pitches. So long story short, even though I misread something, 4 or 5 innings is my expectation for Houck. But he does have really good strikeout stuff, like you said. 31.8% strikeout percentage. Not a terrible matchup against Minnesota. You also don't have Andrelton Simmons in the lineup, so that takes one of the really low K guys out. Brent Rooker is in, Jake Cave is in, Sano is in, Garver is in. These guys all K a lot. So I think it is a spot where Houck can rack up some strikeouts, but it would be surprising if he went more than 4 or 5 innings.
Yeah, so the one thing that does still kind of want me to get to him, I wish the price was a little more appealing on DraftKings. FanDuel, I can't reasonably get to him just because the win bonus, the quality start bonus become more important, but at 7,900 on DK, well, sure, the price is maybe a little higher than I like to pay for him. He's only projected for 0.6% ownership today. And there's some pitchers we're going to talk about later, one of them in particular being Jack Flaherty, who's projected to be nearly 50% of the field's lineups. And I'm trying to get underweight to him. I think that Houck is one of the guys who, just considering his low ownership, not that I want to get to a ton of him, but as him being totally unowned, I still want to get to him at like 5% or so. Just because of the strikeout upside and just that he's totally unowned by the field, because I do recognize the upside there. So is he somebody you're going to be willing to play today?
Yeah, I think he's just useful in the context of, if you have a more popular lineup, say you have some Orioles or some of the Angels or, one of those more popular teams, using someone like Tanner Houck is going to help lower the total ownership of your lineup. It's certainly conceivable that he beats guys like Madison Bumgarner. Bumgarner definitely will be allowed to work deeper into the game if he's pitching well, but there's a huge strikeout difference between the two. You could conceivably get, 7 strikeouts in 4 innings from Houck and be perfectly glad that you played him at 7,900. So not someone I want my night to rely on, but he does, I think, serve a purpose on this slate as far as if you need a lower owned pitcher because your bats are a little bit more popular, you're at least getting somebody that has the ability to rack up strikeouts.
All right. And then on the other side, Griffin Jax is going to be on the mound for Minnesota. And to me, he's just somebody who does not profile to become a good major league pitcher. 5.11 ERA, a 5.16 expected ERA. He's also really struggling to generate swing and misses, only 18.7% K rate. So this matchup against the Boston Red Sox is what I think should be a pretty big issue for a pitcher who's generating a lot of contact. There's also leading to a lot of ownership going to Boston, but I kind of get it. So team 13%, 13% aggregate ownership, 9% chance being a top stack. Certainly a good spot for them, but how are you going to be handling Boston here?
Yeah, kind of similar to what I'd said about the Angels originally before the ownership update. I think it's a really good spot for Boston. I want to get to these hitters because it's a really, really good spot. But also you want to be aware of who you're pairing them with. So for example, you're getting at least 10% ownership to 6 different guys on Boston right now. Schwarber, Devers, Bogarts, Kike, Martinez, Verdugo, all projected for 10+%. Schwarber leading the way at 23%. If you put 5 of those guys together, then it becomes kind of difficult to differentiate your lineup. But if you're rostering a couple of those guys with, like a 1 to 2% owned Tampa stack, then I really don't care that much about the ownership. Schwarber individually, I think does look like the best option. He's just mispriced here. You have Devers at 5,900, Bogarts at 56, Martinez at 52, and then somehow Kyle Schwarber comes in at 4,500. His expected WOBA against right-handed pitching this year is north of 400, just putting up absolutely absurd numbers. And Griffin Jax does not project as a major league pitcher long-term, at least not as a starter. So it looks like a very, very good spot for Boston. Just need to be aware of who you're mixing them with ownership-wise in your lineup. Yeah,
I'm not even sure that he projects all that good as a minor league starter because the recent numbers we have on Griffin Jax in the minor leagues, 2021 in AAA, to 3.76 ERA. And a 4.57 xFIP. Then you go back to 2019, no 2020 minor league data, but in 2019, a 4.5 ERA, a 5.82 xFIP. So Griffin Jax, we have a guy who was not really all that successful in the minor leagues. Now he gets called up to the major leagues, and shocking, he can't get out major league hitters after he couldn't get out minor league hitters. So to me, he's somebody who I definitely want to pick on. I agree with you. Kyle Schwarber, particularly for cash games, I think I'll never call a hitter a must play in cash games, but he's a very strong cash consideration. So Boston team I certainly want to get to.
Yeah, if you somehow don't have Schwarber in cash today, you're not going to be enjoying every time he comes to the plate.
No, he's definitely potential at a home run. And I mean, he went like a whole month where he homered every single game, and that could very well end up being the case again today. Next game that we have here to talk about, we've got Cleveland at home against Texas. Eli Morgan on the mound for the Indians, and Eli Morgan's been a pitcher who we've had a bunch of discussions about this guy, not really know what to make of him. For a really long time, he was a guy who was generating a bunch of strikeouts while also not walking guys. We've seen both those go in the opposite directions in recent starts. He hasn't been generating as many strikeouts. He's also been walking a few more guys than he was before. So the walk rate's still overall low at 5.2%, but the strikeout rate has come down to 23.3%. So he's no longer a pitcher that I'm really considering for DFS purposes, but it is a good matchup against Texas. So what are you doing with both sides of this equation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel good at all about Morgan, but he is projected for about 1.5% ownership, which makes me interested in those larger field tournaments, kind of in the same role as Tanner Houck. Like if I have a low owned stack, I'm going to just go to guys like Bumgarner in that price range because I think that they're better pitchers and, he has a good matchup as well. But if, for example, I have a Boston stack, I'm probably going to want as little ownership elsewhere as I can get. And that's where Eli Morgan becomes useful because, he's not, I don't think he's going to be very good long-term. He doesn't have the type of stuff that successful major league pitchers normally have. Only throws about 90 miles an hour, has a good changeup, kind of pitches like it's 1986, and guys back then had success, but they don't really anymore. So the margin for error for him is really low, but he's also mostly facing a minor league team. This Texas offense is really, really bad, and it wouldn't be surprising at all if Morgan's able to navigate his way through it and have a pretty big start. So as long as he's not getting ownership, I'm interested in Morgan. If he does start pulling ownership, that'll disappear pretty quickly for me. But as is right now, I do have interest in Eli Morgan.
And then are you going to be approaching the Ranger stack as a team that you want to get to at all? We have them with way more ownership. Actually, I didn't even realize how much ownership this was until the latest update. This is crazy to me. I get that Eli Morgan, we both said we don't think he's got the best outlook as a major league pitcher, but the Texas Rangers with 8.1% aggregate ownership as a team, that is a crazy high number for a Texas offense.
Yeah, and it makes sense because I didn't crunch a cash lineup right before the show, but I crunched one this morning, and Texas guys were popping up. At the time, Yanni Hernandez, who isn't in the lineup, but he was instead you have a 2K flat Leody Tavares leading off, so kind of the same thing. it's just a really cheap lineup. You have a guy leading off at 2K who has speed. You have Adolis Garcia at 2,900. Nate Lowe has some power at 2,700. Those guys are all fine and really, really cheap. So they're going to show up in optimizers as useful plays to help you get to those Red Sox, help you get to, Shohei Ohtani and up to Burns and Flaherty. So they'll show up, but they'll probably also be owned a little bit more than they should, given that they aren't very good, even though the matchup is not bad, I don't think, against Morgan. This is just a spot where the way ownership is projected right now, if I'm going to one side, I'm going to the Eli Morgan side because he's not getting the ownership, whereas the Rangers are getting some ownership. If this were to flip between now and lock, it's not a spot where I'm like holding my ground and saying, no, it's definitely going to be an Eli Morgan game. Like, I would gladly take some shots against him with cheap bats, but as it looks right now, if I'm going to one side, I'd rather go to Eli Morgan outside of cash games. If you need to use Tavares, if you need to use Garcia or Lowe, that's perfectly fine. They aren't that good, but they're also really cheap.
Yeah, and the Rangers are not the only super popular team in this game. On the other side, the Cleveland Indians currently at 10.5% aggregate ownership projected for the team, so they are the most negatively leveraged stack over on DraftKings right now, and then on FanDuel, this is also a team that's fairly popular, 8.2% projected ownership. So one of the most negatively leveraged stacks on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Taylor Hearn, not particularly good pitcher, but it's not like he's been totally miserable this year. 3.97 ERA, 4.5 expected ERA. So I look at Cleveland as a team that I'm just not going to be interested in stacking because of how high the ownership is.
I'm a little more interested in Cleveland. So the issue is that there's four guys really getting ownership: Wilson Ramos, Jose Ramirez, Ahmed Rosario, and Miles Straw. I think that they all are some of the top plays at their positions, so the ownership makes sense. Nobody else is really getting that much ownership. The problem is that when you get to the bottom of the order, I don't really want to roster those guys either. But individually, I think Franmil Reyes looks fantastic here. 5,500 batting cleanup, only projected for 5.5% ownership. I think it's a pretty good spot. Taylor Hearn pitched part of the season out of the bullpen. They've since given him some starts. Overall, as a starter this year, only a 19.6% strikeout percentage, 1.46 home runs per 9. I think it sets up as a good spot for Cleveland. I think Ramirez is one of the best third base plays. I think Rosario, Straw, Ramos are some of the best plays at their positions, point per dollar and just, top projected. And then Reyes, I think, gives you a really high ceiling. Oscar Mercado is cheap and not getting a lot of ownership. So if you work those guys in the Cleveland stacks, I think it pulls down your ownership a little bit. I don't think I get, if Cleveland does come in around 10.5% aggregate ownership as we have projected right now, I probably come in below that number just because there's other teams that I'm going to want to get to. But I do think it's a good spot for Cleveland. And I think individually their ownership actually isn't that bad.
Yeah, if I had to roster one guy relative to ownership at the bottom of the lineup, it would be Oscar Mercado, who hasn't been great this year, but we did see him hit left-handed pitching really well in the past. But the other guys at the bottom of this lineup, it's Mercado, Yu Chang, Dan Johnson, Ernie Clement. These are all like computer generated players that pop up in like a 2K game that, whatever, they're min price, they're projected for like 2 to 3% ownership. So if he gets
Ben calling creative players.
Yeah. That's anybody who's just an NPC at the end of a baseball lineup, they're creative players to me. And that's what Yu Chang, Dan Johnson, Ernie Clement are for me. But I actually don't mind Oscar Mercado individually. He's hit the ball a little bit better as of late. And then bringing up his numbers overall for the year this season, it's not what it's been in the past with 79 WRC plus this year, but he did have a 96 WRC plus last year and had a little bit of power upside. So if I have to roster one of these guys at the end, it would be Oscar Mercado, and I don't really mind him.
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. The next game that we have here is talk about Tyler McGill is going to be on the mound for the Mets against the San Francisco Giants. And the Giants offense has certainly not been one to pick on this year. They have one of the best offense in baseball, but I think McGill is legitimately good. He's produced really good results this year, and it's not like he's really tailed off as the season's gone on all that much. 3.21 ERA, 2.85 expected ERA, strikeout stuff pretty solid, 25.9%. The matchup clearly isn't great, but we've got him projected for very, very low ownership. And I want to actually refresh to make sure this is correct, because something that really popped up to me earlier today with McGill. So he's 6,900. His ownership's come up a little bit in the latest run, but still 7% for McGill at only 6,900. The matchup clearly isn't ideal, but I feel like the price is just wrong here.
Yeah, kind of. Like, he has fallen off a bit recently. It is a really difficult matchup. The Giants, just have good hitters throughout their lineup. I think the salary is to me, it's more like where it should be. If McGill were, let's say, 8K, I wouldn't even really consider him here. At 6,900, he at least serves, a purpose. He's cheap. If he's going to get 7% ownership and Bumgarner is going to get 9, I would give the edge to Bumgarner. But I think, if you're getting some McGill, that's fine. Just I don't like the spot. The salary is okay. I think the ownership's about where it should be.
And then one other thing I'll add, because I do feel a little better about McGill than you, is his recent results. Well, they haven't been bad. They're not as good as they were early in the season, but here are his last 3 starts. And by the way, it doesn't get any easier today either because it's against the Giants, but his last 3 starts were against the Giants, against the Dodgers, and then against the Phillies. So he has run into some tough offenses lately, and still in those starts, he had 17 strikeouts to 4 walks. So I'm going to be overweight to the field on McGill today. Obviously, the matchup against the San Francisco Giants is far from ideal, but is that a team that you're looking to stack then?
Yeah, I think I actually like the Giants here because not only do they have good hitters, but they're not really expensive at all. The most expensive hitter on DraftKings in their lineup is Brandon Crawford hitting 5th at 4,300. You have a $3,200 Wade leading off. Brandon Belt outside of San Francisco. I say it a lot, but I think he's one of the most underrated hitters in baseball over the last few years. He's only 3,900. Dickerson's batting cleanup at 2,300. I mean, if I can get Alex Dickerson, especially in tournaments, Alex Dickerson at 2,300 or Tavares from the Rangers at 2K, give me Alex Dickerson every time just because he has so much more power. So I think the Giants right now, not projected for much ownership and just a better offense than a lot of the other value teams that we have.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Sammy Long is going to be on the mound for the Giants, and he's produced spotty results this year. Overall, he's somebody that I don't think is going to ultimately be a very good pitcher. And then he's going up against the Mets. In terms of one-off hitters that I think have some of the best chance to homer, I would put Pete Alonso on that list for sure as a guy who I think is somewhat likely to homer today. But that aside, the Mets are not a team I'm really looking to stack today.
Yeah, same here. Long's put up pretty good or very good strikeout numbers in the minors. Steamer projects him for 9.5 strikeouts per 9 as well. My biggest issue with him is I only expect him to go 4-ish innings in this game. So I think it's pretty difficult to roster him at least very often. And I'm with you. Alonso is pretty cheap at 4,400. JD Davis is cheap at 3,200. But overall, there's just teams I like more than the Mets.
Also, one thing I'll add about the Mets, Francisco Lindor, I don't think he's been officially activated, except he's expected to be activated today. So that Mets lineup should look better than it normally is. Probably a little bit too late considering how far they fall in the standings. But the top of that Mets lineup, there's definitely some danger we have there. It's going to be the middle of that lineup. Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Javi Baez. It's a lot of talent there. Like I said, probably a little bit too late for the Mets considering how far they fall in the standings. But it's enough for me at least to where I'm probably not going to really want to roster Sammy Long here. But unless I missed it, did you say, are you going to be getting to Sammy Long in tournaments?
I don't think so. Okay. Just not stretched out enough for me. At 6,600, I think like he could in 4 innings strike out enough guys to pay it off. But probably not someone I get to on a slate this big.
Yeah, and we've got the news god on Negro Loco. He did chime in and say Lindor is expected to play today. And yeah, that was what I had saw as well before we started. I just wasn't sure if the Mets lineup had come out and with whether he was officially in or not. But I don't think we have a Mets lineup quite yet. Usually when we say we don't have a lineup, it comes out as we're saying it, but not the case yet. No lineup. Guys, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got a whole bunch of fantasy football content coming up. And this isn't the only baseball show of the day. MLB Live Before Lock is coming up right after us. So you're going to want to check that out as well. And also, if you're going to be signing up for the NFL Awesemo package, go ahead and use the promo code BLITZ. We have an early bird special. It was 25% yesterday, and that ended, but we still have it available, but now for 15%. So it is something that as we get closer to the season, we're going to be running promo codes, but the discount you get on the package is going to go down as we get closer to the season. But if you want to sign up, there's no need to wait. If you're going to be playing fantasy football, if you're going to be playing and using the tools over at Awesemo, take advantage of the early bird specials we have and using the promo code BLITZ right now. That'll get you 15% off your Awesemo Plus annual football package. All right, the next game we have here to talk about, the Miami Marlins against the Washington Nationals. Jesus Luzardo on the mound for Miami, and I feel like we have this matchup. There's something similar type of spot with Luzardo recently. The thing with him, though, is finally the field has stopped rostering him. Luzardo was like super chalk for a very brief period of time for reasons that are unbeknownst to me, but I still have faith in Luzardo long-term, but as of now, he's just not a particularly good major league pitcher. And there's so much right-handed power in the Atlanta Braves lineup that this is a team that is not picking up much ownership at 1.9%. Give me some of these right-handed Braves power bats against Luzardo.
Nats, but yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Nats.
Yeah, right there with you. Lane Thomas leading off at 2K looks pretty good. Ryan Zimmerman's in the lineup at 2,700. This is another team that right now is just projected to get less ownership than the Rangers. I think it's a pretty similar spot where the Nats offense is bad, but the pitcher they're facing, he has prospect status, he has pedigree, but he has not been good by any stretch of the imagination recently. And there's a lot of right-handed bats here that can do some damage. The park isn't great. And you certainly could see Luzardo come out and pile up some strikeouts because he does have the ability. We saw that every year prior to this one. But based on what we've seen from Luzardo lately, I do think going to guys like Keyboom batting fifth, Zimmerman hitting cleanup, Thomas leading off, at the very least, it's not any worse than the Rangers.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to add too. So we have all this ownership going to teams like Cleveland and Texas in particular. I think the Washington bats, who I accidentally called the Braves before, which I'm not sure why I did that, but either way, the Washington bats here in terms of the top of the lineup, like Lane Thomas, min price at 2K. I think he makes for a really good pivot off of some of those really chalky Rangers bats, because is Lane Thomas really that much worse than what we're seeing at the top of the Texas lineup? To me, not really. The difference is just that we're getting Lane Thomas at 4.8% owned, where some of those Texas bats, just going to go back to them to see what some of the individual ownership was. But we were having guys in that lineup who were just massively popular, like Adolis Garcia, 19.4%. Sure, he has power upside, but Leody Taveras is 3x the ownership of Thomas. They're both leading off. They're both min price. They're both in good spots. So I'd be more apt to get overweight to the field on Thomas than I am to Taveras. So that's where I really think the utility is to the Nationals. Is if you're looking to save salary and not do it with the Texas Rangers, I think this is the best way to differentiate.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And I think maybe you do see, as ownership updates, maybe we do get a little bit more going to Washington, and that gap between them and Texas disappears a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens. But either way, I think that I just kind of prefer the Nats here anyway. Zimmerman at least gives you some power. Thomas is okay. Like, we still don't really know what he is. He doesn't project to be that good, but he's had flashes going back to his time with St. Louis. So I kind of just think they should be owned in the same way that Texas is.
Yeah, and they're just not right now, which is really what is appealing to me, is that you get a team where you get cheap hitters. They're kind of reasonably rostered, and in a spot against Luzardo, who at one point he looked like a really good pitcher, but at least as of now, he's having some sort of issues, whether it's with mechanics or something else. Maybe he's been pitching hurt, but just hasn't been able to get out major league hitters for an extended period of time now. On the other side of the game, Eric Fedde is going to be starting for Washington, and Fedde, not typically somebody who draws all that much consideration. His results this year, 5.14 ERA, 4.89 expected ERA. I did see some guys in the YouTube chat earlier bringing up that they liked Eric Fedde as a play. The field kind of does too. Eric Fedde at 11.7% projected ownership. There's a bunch of other cheap pitchers we've talked about today that I would just rather get to than Fedde, considering his popularity.
Yeah, agreed. When we did the show this morning, he wasn't projected for as much ownership, and I kind of said that I liked him at low ownership. At 11%, I understand why it's there. Miami isn't any good. Fedde isn't really any good either, but he's not terrible. He has, for the season, a 4.2 xFIP, 20.5% strikeout percentage. It's a nice park to pitch in. I think he's pretty much owned where he should be. Again, I would give a slight edge to Bumgarner in this price range, though.
Yeah, that's where I feel too, is if you look at our top pitchers tool, there's a lot of pitchers that are kind of projected for similar sort of outcomes in this price range. And Eric Fedde's just picking up more ownership than them. So, like Tanner Houck, we have him with a 7.3% chance to be a top pitcher on the slate. Eric Fedde, 7.4%, but it's 11.7% projected ownership to 0.7%. So guys like McGill will project for less ownership, Bumgarner, and they're both a little bit cheaper. So guys that I'd prefer to get to than Fedde for sure. But at the same time, the Marlins are not a team I'm going to be looking to stack today.
Yeah, same. It's just really difficult, especially when like Jazz Chisholm's 4,500. If he were cheaper, he would actually really fill a hole on this slate at second base. But at 4,500, that's a pretty expensive price tag to pay. I could see, using like a 3K Jesus Sanchez, but even that, I would rather go to the $2,300 Dickerson from the Giants. So it's pretty tough to get here. Not a great park, not a horrible pitcher in Fedde, an actually horrible offense in Miami. If I'm going to one side here, I think I'd rather go to the Nats.
All right, the next game, and this is a fun one to talk about. We have the Atlanta Braves against the New York Yankees, and a couple of high upside pitchers that are certainly against offenses that I typically don't like to pick on. Although as of late, I kind of feel like we've been forced to play some Braves pitchers in this spot. But Charlie Morton going up against the Yankees. Morton is a very fantasy friendly pitcher, and I think it was earlier in the show, Eric Johnson asked if if Morton was going to be the most popular pitcher on the slate. No, he's somewhat popular, but it's not like he's massive chalk. 22% projected ownership for him on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, he is projected for 8.2% ownership. So Charlie Morton, I think, is somebody worth being in the tournament player pool for sure. I don't feel great about it because the Yankees have a very prolific offense, but Charlie Morton, you're willing to roll the dice with him against the Yankees' power.
Yeah, I think I might like the spot even a little bit more than you do, just because obviously it's dangerous. I agree with that. There are plenty of good hitters in the Yankees lineup, but they do lose their designated hitter here going to the National League. So that waters it down a bit. And since the start of last season, every single hitter in this lineup, with the exception of LeMahieu and Rizzo at the top, has struck out at least 27.3% of the time against right-handed pitching. Like, that's just insane numbers. Aaron Judge has the lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching in this lineup, except for LeMahieu and Rizzo, who both are really difficult to strike out. So kind of like once you get past those, you should get Morton being able to pick up strikeouts. He generally does a good job of limiting power. He's only allowed 0.77 home runs per 9 this year. 28.4% strikeout percentage is very good. 3.33 xFIP is one of the best on the slate. So, he is getting some ownership. It is a somewhat scary spot against the Yankees, but I do think there's a high ceiling for him given the strikeout numbers in the Yankees lineup.
And then on the other side, the Yankees as a team, obviously it's kind of a lot of the similar sentiments as we feel about Charlie Morton, where it's like, hey, Charlie Morton, viable in GPPs, but there's risk involved. The Yankees offense, they're going against Charlie Morton, so there's risk involved because he's a really good pitcher. But the Yankees offense has a lot of power. They're projected for very, very low ownership today. There is some favorable pricing. So are the Yankees a team that you might be looking to stack today?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think they're similar to the Blue Jays in that the matchup's really difficult, but it's not like anybody would be surprised if they did really well. The thing that to me makes them a little bit more appealing than the Blue Jays is twofold. For one, you mentioned the pricing. Aaron Judge is 5,100, but other than that, Joey Gallo is the most expensive hitter on DraftKings in the lineup at 4,200. So it's a really, really cheap offense. They're going to be pretty easy to get to. And then secondly, compared to like Toronto, Dylan Cease isn't getting much ownership. So if Toronto does well, that's great if you have them, but outside of what they did, you're not negatively correlating with anything that matters. It's not like you're knocking off a bunch of people with Dylan Cease. If the Yankees do well, we're projecting around 20% of the field to have Charlie Morton and essentially to just have dead lineups while your 1 to 2% owned stack does well. So they're just in a little bit more powerful spot in terms of competing against your opponents in tournaments. It makes them look a little bit better.
And then on the other side, we have one of the highest variance pitchers in baseball, Andrew Heaney, who for real life purposes, not great. He has a 5.51 ERA this year. He gives up a whole bunch of hard contact. The underlying numbers do look better than what his ERA is. But with that said, he gives up so many home runs in hard contact that I think he's just a guy who profiles to generally underperform his peripheral stats. Then from a fantasy standpoint, here's his fantasy points totals from the last few games. 19, 5, 23, 2, 23. The guy's all over the place. He's really hard to predict. He's a very high strikeout pitcher. If he's pitching somewhat decent on any individual day, he puts up really big fantasy totals because of his ability to strike guys out. So this is a spot where I want to play both sides. Andrew Heaney is only projected for 12% ownership at a fairly modest price on DK. If he's able to make it through 6 innings unscathed, he's going to strike out a bunch of hitters. But on the other side too, he's viable to give up a whole bunch of hard contact also. So the Braves offense isn't going to be massively popular. Both sides I want to be overweight too.
Yeah, if I'm only rostering one side, I prefer Atlanta just because I think they have the edge here against Heaney. But you're right. He's 7,500. That does factor in his home run issues. And he does have really good strikeout stuff. For the season, he struck out 29.3% of right-handed hitters. The issue is that he's allowed a 188 expected ISO, 236 actual ISO to those righties. And you have tons and tons of right-handed power in this lineup. The other thing that concerns me is that there's not a ton of strikeouts here. And where they're typically towards the bottom of the order. Ozzie Albies has struck out about 14% against left-handed pitching since the start of the 2019 season. Riley has a high strikeout percentage. Soler is at about 27%. Duvall's at 28%. Other than that, you have Peterson at 24%, but his strikeout numbers against lefties haven't been as good as against righties anyway. And then it really drops off. Darno at 21.5, Freeman at 21, Swanson at 21, Albies at 14. And then you do have the pitcher spot. So I think it's kind of just a mediocre spot in terms of the strikeout upside. And then it's also a really dangerous spot against a lot of right-handed power. So I understand, getting to some Heaney in tournaments just because he is 7,500. He probably has a higher ceiling than someone like Bumgarner just because he's more likely to somehow strike out 10 guys than Bumgarner is. But I still lean towards Bumgarner at similar ownership. I just think the spot's a lot better. And then Atlanta, just getting virtually no ownership. They are kind of expensive, but there's a lot of power here against a pitcher that gives up a lot of home runs.
Yeah, and some of the guys that are the power bats that I like to get to aren't massively expensive. Jorge Soler, 4,200, Adam Duvall, 4,100. These are kind of the Braves guys that I've been targeting the most as of late anyway, relative to price. So 2% ownership or 4% ownership for Jorge Soler, but only 0.5% ownership for Adam Duvall. Even though he's hitting towards the bottom of the order, he's a guy who has a lot of one-off power. And there have been slates back when he was with the Marlins, where it's like, yeah, the Marlins scored 3 runs. How'd they do it? Adam Duvall had 3 solo homers. So if you're looking for any one individual hitter as a one-off from the Braves that is not picking up much ownership, Adam Duvall is somebody who I never mind as a one-off play. But some of these expensive bats, guys like Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, are they still guys you think you might be looking to get to?
Yeah, without a doubt. There's enough cheap pitching on this slate. I don't think it'll be that tough. Whether you're using Bumgarner or we haven't talked about him yet, but German Marquez, only 8,200. You mentioned your guy, Tyler McGill. That's the kind of build that he fits into, I think. There's more than enough upside amongst cheap arms. I don't think the Braves should be that tough to get to.
All right, next game, and this is one that's tough for me because I don't like the Tigers offense. Jack Flaherty, I think, is a pretty solid starting pitcher, but he is so popular today. We currently have Jack Flaherty at 9,600, projected to be now 37% ownership. So that has come down a little bit. But on FanDuel, he's projected to be the single most popular pitcher on the slate. So we have Flaherty now 22% owned on FanDuel as a single pitcher site. That's really steep ownership for Flaherty. I certainly want him to be in my player pool, but I mean, I'd rather get to Corbin Burns in a fairly significant way, and they're picking up similar ownership. Corbin Burns a little more popular on DK. He's a little bit less popular on FanDuel. Good spot for Flaherty. I just don't know that I want to have him in nearly half my lineups.
Yeah, the one thing that I did notice when I built a cash lineup earlier, because I'm in the same boat as you, where I like the spot for Flaherty for sure. Detroit's one of the weakest offenses in the league, and Flaherty is a good pitcher. One thing I noticed is that even though I would have no issue saving some money and going to some other high upside arms that are cheaper, there's so many cheap bats on this slate that you kind of don't need to. For example, when I built my cash lineup, I had a couple of weak cheap bats in my lineup with Burns and Flaherty, and I was like, okay, what happens if I turn Flaherty into Marquez? And it really just upgraded one bat because there are still so many good point per dollar bats that are cheap. And there's enough of them that they won't even necessarily be that highly owned. So I could see getting to, around the field on Flaherty just because it's kind of okay, I have all the bats that I want and I still can fit Flaherty easily. So the pricing, the mispriced hitters make it so I think Flaherty's ownership makes some sense. But I'm with you if you're just looking at pitcher versus pitcher. I don't feel very different. Flaherty versus Marquez. I know the top stack tool has a pretty big gap between them, but we'll talk about it more. I absolutely love Marquez today. Corbin Burns, I'm with you. If I'm only rostering one, I prefer Burns to Flaherty. I just think he's the better pitcher, hands down. So my expectation is I come in around the field on Flaherty across 150 lineups, but as usual, when I'm getting to the pitchers like him, it's going to be with lower owned teams around him. Where I'm going to more popular hitters, I'll probably be using someone instead of Flaherty.
Yeah, and just one other concern I have with Flaherty, and he's a track record of being a pretty good pitcher, so it's not something that's massively concerning. He did struggle last year, though. He had a 4.91 ERA, 5.07 expected ERA. Even though he's a 2.68 ERA this year, he's a 4.17 expected ERA. He's a 227 BABIP. He has a fairly inflated strand rate at 74.5%. I just have some concerns that he's a guy who could regress a little bit going forward. And, I get it's kind of towards the end of the season, so it's how much regression could a guy have at this point? But I think he's pitched a little bit over his head. I don't know if the spot against the Tigers is the spot where just everything crumbles down, but it's more so that I just look at the slate and it's all right, he's getting comparable ownership to Corbin Burns. I'd rather roster Corbin Burns, but to your point for cash games, I think that it's a pretty high priority. Just get Flaherty and Corbin Burns together and then save money with all the cheap hitters we have today.
Yeah, especially because as someone just pointed out in chat, I hadn't noticed, but it looks like weather's gotten worse in the Cubs game. So especially from a cash standpoint, if my question was kind of, do I drop from Flaherty to Marquez? If these weather concerns hold up, the answer is clearly Flaherty.
Yeah, and we'll bring that up in a second. That is the next game on the slate, so that'll be a good segue. But first, just talking about Casey Mize, the matchup he has against the St. Louis Cardinals. Mize has been a pitcher who's, been pretty underwhelming so far during his time in the big leagues. But the St. Louis Cardinals, I think there's offenses that are overall in better spots today. And the Cardinals picking up a little bit of ownership. So no real interest in me in Mize, and the Cardinals don't appear to be all that favorable to stack.
Yeah, I don't really have interest in Mize here. The Cardinals are a pretty difficult team to strike out. He's not a great strikeout pitcher. There is one thing that jumps out from the Cardinals lineup, and that's that Dylan Carlson is back. He's 3K and he's batting third. Casey Mize has had pretty substantial issues with left-handed bats so far. He's allowed a 383 expected WOBA, 287 expected ISO, while only striking out 20%. So I already thought Tommy Edman was one of the better second base options today from a point per dollar standpoint. He's having a terrible year at the plate, but he does have a track record of being an okay hitter. And, again, second base is just pretty weak and he's pretty cheap. But now you throw Dylan Carlson in there as well at 3K. I think he's a very good value option in the outfield. I like Tyler O'Neill, even though he's right-handed. I think this sets up as a good matchup because Mize doesn't really strike guys out. O'Neill does have a ton of power when he makes contact. So Carlson being in there, again, I'm with you. I don't love full card stacks here. I think the ownership is there, and there's just other teams I like a little bit more. But I think Carlson being there makes it so that 2-man and 3-man Cardinal stacks look a little bit better. And individually, I think Carlson's just a really good play.
All right. And now we have to talk about the next game here. This is the Cubs-Rockies game. And you mentioned Marquez there, and the weather's a little bit of an issue. This is a tricky one, though, because if you just look at some of the weather reports, it's not like there's a massively high chance of rain, but it looks like there's going to be some storms that are coming in and out. So maybe it's not a game that gets canceled, except maybe it starts raining in the game and pitchers come out. And, that could certainly be an issue in terms of somebody like Marquez only being able to pitch 3 innings or something like that. And then it starts raining. There's a rain delay. The game starts back up and then he comes out. So to me, I just feel like there isn't enough information here to really know what to make of the weather. So in terms of cash games, though, you mentioned it before, I think the priority just becomes going to Flaherty because he doesn't come with any of those weather risks. But Herman Marquez, what are you going to be doing with him in tournaments right now?
Yeah, like you said, just kind of not enough information weather-wise for me right now to say for sure what I'm doing with him. From a cash standpoint, I think it's just if there are weather concerns, there's no real reason to get to him over Flaherty. From a tournament standpoint, though, it really matters what the actual weather concerns are, because if as we get closer to lock, there are storms in the area, there could be a pop-up that causes an in-game delay, but that's not really a certainty. It just could happen. That's going to knock down Marquez's ownership, but it's also there's also still, a pretty decent chance that he's not affected. I would love to get to Marquez in that situation. If there is rain, it is going to go over the stadium in like the 4th inning. There's a very good chance there's an in-game delay. Then it's just going to be like, okay, well, I love the spot for Marquez, but I guess I just don't get to play him today. So it really is going to depend on what the specifics of the weather are in tournaments. In cash, it's kind of just if there is weather, just use Flaherty.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is ownership right now is projected for 23.3% ownership. Let me refresh and see if that's still the case. Yeah, 23.3. It's tough at 8,200. I really want to play him. But the other thing, too, that I think we could talk about that's going to kind of be important is we also have Tyler Mahle starting his game at around the same time. And I like him as a tournament option. So I think that you don't have to make this decision before the slate starts. I think you could wait as long as possible. This game has an 8:05 p.m. Eastern time start time. There are other pitchers that we could swap to in the later games, Tyler Mahle being my top option here. He is a little bit more expensive, so you have to make the salary for it. But I think that there's reason to just try to play it out. And the other thing, too, is, who knows? Maybe people get way off Herman Marquez before the slate because they don't want to deal with the weather. And then maybe it starts to look better as the day goes on. So you don't have to make the decision before the slate. This could be a good situation to utilize late swap. Yeah,
for sure. Like you said, the only issue is that Tyler Mahle is more expensive. Burns is more expensive. Garcia is more expensive. So, and there's limited offenses to swaps to. So I think there's going to be a lot of times where it's just like, oh, I have Marquez and I can't afford those other guys. But I'm with you, definitely pay attention and look to late swap to those guys if you can. You might have to just, I guess, go to Brady Singer in the worst case. But I mean, pay close attention to ownership to the weather. I think generally my rule of thumb here from a tournament standpoint is if there's a chance of rain, I roll the dice on it. If it's like going to rain, like there's just a line of rain or storms coming through, then I'll hold off. And if it's not raining and the game starts in a delay, I run the other direction as quickly as I possibly can.
Yeah, we just had news guy on Negro Loco. He said the Chicago game, he's saying postpone risk somewhere a little over the 20% mark. Something else about it, too, is that if you're in our premium Slack chat, El Negro Loco, he does a great job of posting any kind of updates, whether it be players getting scratched or just any sort of news whatsoever. Weather also for baseball, he's always big. He's always on top of it. So that's always something that we could be on the lookout for from him. But On the other side, Justin Steele going to be starting for the Cubs against this Rockies offense. We talked about the Rockies yesterday as just being one of the worst offense in baseball when they get away from Coors Field. Ultimately, they were okay against Kyle Hendricks. They scored a few runs. I think what was the final score 6-4 in that game. So it was like, hey, the Rockies didn't get shut out, but it's not like they were a significant part that we needed of the slate. I kind of feel similarly about them again in our top stack tool today. We have them with the third best odds being the top scoring team on the slate. I just don't see it that way.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Obviously they came through to some extent yesterday, but Steele may or may not be good. I don't think he's that good. He has struggled as a starter so far. The wind is blowing out a bit in Wrigley, not, a true Wrigley wind game where the total goes nuts, but pretty decent hitting weather. The issue is just still the Rockies aren't very good once you get them outside of Coors Field. Connor Joe is still cheap and leading off. Trevor Story is good. CJ Cron has power. Outside of that, there's just not a whole lot that I really want here. You do get Taylor Motter in the lineup. He's 2K flat if you want a value bat from the Rockies. But overall, it's just, I don't know. I feel better, even though they are pretty high in the top stack tool. I just feel better going to teams like Tampa Bay. We haven't talked about Houston, Atlanta, a lot of teams that I think just have higher ceilings than the Rockies do.
Yeah, it's a team that, Coors Field is a different animal just because it's like kind of random. It's almost like a dice roll. It's like, who cares if the offenses suck? It's Coors Field. Sometimes the ball just flies out of the park. But you take Colorado away from that situation where they have a sub 70 WRC plus for the year, it's just generally not a good offense. So Justin Steele isn't a pitcher I want to roster, but the Rockies offense, especially because we're projecting them for ownership today, we currently have them with 7.9% aggregate ownership as a team right now. There's just other places I'd rather go. The Rockies, not for me today. They weren't for yesterday, and didn't kill me that I didn't have them. But at the same time, it's not like anybody who played them was disappointed at the end of the day relative to the other options. So no for me on the Rockies today. But next game we have here to talk about, this is going to be a spot that I'm going to be on very heavily. To me, the top overall play on the slate is Corbin Burnes at home against the Cincinnati Reds. Corbin Burnes has been absurdly good this year to the point where if you look at his underlying numbers, they're better than his actual ERA, which should be impossible when you consider he's a 2.13 ERA. He's a 1.82 expected ERA, a 1.59 FIP. He has a 35.1% K rate, a 4.6% walk rate. I think Corbin Burnes is, now that Jacob deGrom isn't in the picture, I think Corbin Burnes is currently the best pitcher in baseball. I want to get to him as much as possible today.
Yep, right there with you. Just phenomenal pitcher. Not the best strikeout matchup here. Like going through the Reds lineup, there's, Joey Votto only strikes out about 20%. Moustakas is at 19%. But then it does get up a little bit higher. Farmer 22%, Barnhart 23.5%, Naquin's at 24%, Castellanos at about 24.5%. So kind of an average-ish matchup in terms of that and a team that can hit, but I don't really care with Burnes. He's just so good. He has a 35.1% strikeout percentage for the season, best on the slate by far, 2.33 xFIP, best on the slate, 4.6% walk percentage, best on the slate. He's only allowed 0.35 home runs per 9. Just like you said, the best or one of the best pitchers in baseball. Not that expensive, especially when you consider that there's plenty of cheap bats. It's not going to be that difficult to get to him at 10-6 or even I think he's 11-5 or so on FanDuel. He's going to be fine there as well. Just give me Corbin Burnes.
Yeah, and the other thing that's funny about him is he was about as off last start as he's been all year. He pitches and he ends up pitching 6 shutout innings against the Cardinals. Like his stuff is just so ridiculously good that even when he can't locate, he didn't know where the ball was going. He's struggling to throw strikes. They still really weren't able to hit him. So his floor has been about as high as anybody this year. Obviously, anybody on any individual day could just have a game where it doesn't go their way. But in general, Corbin Burnes has had very, very few bad starts for DFS purposes this year. So he's as safe as it gets. Play him in cash games. And for FanDuel, he should be more popular than Jack Flaherty, in my opinion. On the other side of this game, Tyler Mahle is a pitcher who's been really tough to figure out this year, especially because his outlook changed so much when the sticky substance ban came into effect. But the last 3 starts, we finally started to see Tyler Mahle throw strikes again and find more success. So if you look at his stretch from July through like mid-June, he was walking a bunch of guys, and that seems to have been corrected. His last 3 starts, he's only walked 1 hitter. He struck out 22, and we're not seeing any ownership going to him today. So Tyler Mahle, as far as a tournament option goes, I really like him as a pivot off of a really popular Jack Flaherty. Mahle only projects for 2.6% ownership compared to 37.7% for Jack Flaherty. To me, that's the pivot to make in tournaments.
I think ownership wise between those two, it makes sense if like you have a popular team. The reason I don't think I end up getting to too much Malley is just the difference in projection between him and Flaherty and him and Burns is, I think, pretty big. And then you also have so many guys that are less expensive. You know, we may or may not have Marquez. That would kind of change my feelings a little bit, but you still have Barrios, you still have Morton, Bumgarner. So I think he has a high ceiling. He does have some of the best strikeout stuff on the slate, but I also just think the gap in projection between him and the other pay-up options, and the fact that right now, at least, it looks like I'm on a lot of teams that are not going to get much ownership, makes it so I probably won't need to use him that much. But again, if you end up taking German Marquez out, and that's someone that, I was expecting to get a lot of, if you take him out and I have to spread that ownership around, then maybe I start getting a little bit more Malley. But assuming Marquez is in, I think it's one of those guys where if you like, I don't think he's a bad play. Like, I'm not going to fault anyone for playing him. I do think that relative to Jack Flaherty, he's not getting enough ownership. But I also think that in most of my lineups, I'm just not really going to need the 2% of $9,900 pitcher because I'm going to have the low on bats.
Yeah, I think, I certainly don't feel super confident in him. It's more just an ownership play for me when we have him, 2.6% owned. The other pitchers who, at least in our projections that we have for a similar outcome, we have German Marquez right there. 23.3% projected ownership, and they have identical odds being a top 2 scoring pitcher on the slate. Obviously, Malley is also a lot more expensive. Then you look at Jack Flaherty, who we do have a much better projection on. He is nearly double the odds of being a top 2 scoring pitcher. But at the same time, Flaherty is also picking up 18x the ownership. So that's a pretty big gap there. That's by my process. I'd want to get to Malley, but it's purely an ownership play. So if we find out an hour from now that Malley is, even 10 or 12% owned, then he becomes much less appealing to me. It's just at the 2% number. I want to be somewhere around, like 10% or so. So not something I'm massively confident in, but on the other side with the Milwaukee Brewers, due to some of the inconsistencies we've seen with Malley, do you think that's a team that you might want to stack?
On a smaller slate, the way I see it right now, I'm actually a little bit more interested just in them individually. Avisail Garcia at 4,200 in particular, I think looks really good. Tyler Mahle has struggled with power this year. He's allowed a 187 expected ISO to righties, 248 actual ISO. And Avisail Garcia has just really hit the hell out of the ball. 343 expected WOBA, 216 expected ISO in 320 plate appearances against right-handed pitching this season. Not a priority on the slate in terms of, I expect to have 20% or anything like that. But individually, if I'm just trying to, find someone that I think is relatively likely to homer, I do like the spot for Garcia.
All right. The next game we have here is going to be a pitcher who, on a lot of slates, I'd kind of want to play in this spot, Luis Garcia at home against the Kansas City Royals. Luis Garcia, though, I think I might feel about Luis Garcia a little bit how you feel about Tyler Mahle, which is that, relative to projections and ownership, he looks good, but I can't necessarily roster everybody on this slate. So Luis Garcia at 9,700 with a 5.7% projected ownership. Sure, maybe that number should be a little higher. I just don't really think he's going to make the cut for me.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. And the other thing with Garcia that really gives me pause is that Houston just hasn't been letting him go that deep into games. He typically goes deep enough where he can put up good fantasy scores, but at his salary, when he's competing with guys like Jack Flaherty and Corbin Burns and Tyler Mahle, you kind of need more than that. He only threw 70 pitches in 5 innings and was pulled last start. He hasn't thrown greater than 90 pitches in a game since I think June 30th. It's been a while, and we've seen Houston just kind of pulling him around the 85 pitch mark. And then on top of that, the bottom of the Kansas City lineup strikes out quite a bit, but these top guys are pretty tough to strike out. No Carlos Santana tonight makes it a little bit weaker, but Merrifield's difficult to strike out. Lopez is difficult to strike out. Benintendi strikes out about an average rate. Perez strikes out, but he's also good. So it's an okay spot for Garcia. The Royals lineup isn't the best for sure. My biggest issues are just his price tag relative to how deep he's likely to go into the game.
Yeah, that's something else also is that we've seen Luis Garcia, like you said, he was pitching. He opened the season as more of an opener, and he was pitching really well. He just started to get extended, got fully stretched out. And then maybe it's a thing where he just hasn't pitched a whole lot of innings in his career. They're just trying to dial him back a little bit. But he is somebody who they've limited a little bit, and that seems to be capping his upside, which is a little bit of an issue. Next game on the slate, and just a couple left here to talk about. One of my favorite offenses on the slate, the Houston Astros at home against Brady Singer and the Royals. So Brady Singer's actually pitched a lot better than what his underlying numbers are, 5.23 ERA, but a 4.32 expected ERA, 3.75 FIP. The thing is, the matchup against the Astros, not necessarily one where I would expect him to all of a sudden start to positively regress. So the Astros only project for 2% ownership on FanDuel, 3% on DK. This is another team that I want to prioritize pretty heavily.
Yeah, it's an ownership spot for me because I don't really love the spot against Singer just because he has been so good at limiting power against righties in particular this year. Sub 100 actual ISO, sub 100 expected ISO, 298 expected WOBA. But he's far from a sure thing. He's one of Kansas City's top pitching prospects, but you expect there to be some inconsistencies there. And this is a very, very difficult matchup against the Astros. Then you factor that with the fact that they're just not getting much ownership. I'd feel a lot differently if you were getting, 6, 7, 8% aggregate ownership going to the Astros. But right now at about 3%, I'm willing to take my chances against a young pitcher who has been pretty good, but not great so far this season. You have just a lot of really, really good hitters on Houston. Michael Brantley is still extremely underpriced for whatever reason. The bottom of the order has some value with Jake Myers, Jason Castro, and Taylor Jones if you need that. And the middle of the order just has a ton of upside. So as long as the ownership stays where it is, I'm with you. I think Houston looks good.
Yeah, Michael Brantley, probably the number one priority for me. I never mind paying up for Yordan Alvarez, 5,300. Also a fine option to get to. The only two guys that are picking up over 5% ownership today, Brantley, Yordan Alvarez. This is a very low-owned team and also cheaper than they probably should be relative to how good the Houston offense is. Now, final game on the slate, and unfortunately one that's going to be one that I just don't have that much interest in, but has Julio Urias officially been named the starter for the Dodgers today?
I don't think so. I think he's still just expected to start, and then we have Pierce Johnson starting for the Padres.
All right, so Julio Urias, who is expected to start today, he's been on the injured list. He was dealing with a calf injury. He hasn't pitched since August 13th was his last start, pitched against the Mets through 82 pitches that time out. The way the Dodgers handle their pitchers, I don't expect Urias to have a massive leash in this game. I think somewhere around like 75 to 80 pitches is probably what we're most likely to see in this game against the Padres. So to me, Urias, obviously a really good pitcher. I don't want to stack the Padres against him, but I don't know that he's going to have enough upside relative to the other arms on the slate to get to.
That's pretty much where I'm at. And then you factor in that he's not cheap at 9,200. He doesn't have a great matchup against the Padres. I'm fine just kind of taking the approach where there's already low-owned expensive guys that if I need them, I can go to in Garcia and Malley. If Julio Urias ends up being the guy that breaks the slate here against the Padres coming back from an injury, then yeah, okay, I guess I'm not going to win.
Yeah, and he is he's also, fairly expensive today, 9,200. There's so many pitchers to pay up for today that we've already talked about that it's hard for me to reasonably say that Urias makes the cut when you consider the matchup and then also all the risks involved in terms of potential pitch count. I'm on the other side. Most likely it's going to be a bullpen game for the Padres. Like you said, Pierce Johnson currently expected to start. What kind of length are you expecting out of him?
Virtually none. His longest appearance in his last 10 outings was an inning and a third. He hasn't thrown more than 28 pitches in any of those. I'm expecting this to be an actual bullpen game for the Padres where, it's not like a Drew Rasmussen bullpen game where he throws 4 to 5 innings. I'm expecting, 1 to 2 from Johnston, and then we go from there.
Yeah, and within the Padres are mostly going to be, a bunch of relievers coming in and out of the game. How does that make you view the Dodgers offense?
I think the Dodgers, it's tough because you never really like bullpen games just because you're getting different matchups, throughout the game. But there's also not much ownership projected to go to the Dodgers right now. And I think it makes sense because they are relatively expensive. If that holds, then I do like getting to the Dodgers, kind of like I do with the Astros. I don't think the Astros are in a great spot, but I do think that there's enough uncertainty around, a young pitcher and Singer that they have a very high ceiling. That's how I feel about the Dodgers too. Ideally, they wouldn't be facing a new pitcher every time they come up to hit, but they're still a very, very good offense that isn't getting much ownership. And so they're still pretty appealing.
Yeah, it's let's see, current ownership for them only 1.9%. They actually do have our top overall leverage score right now on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, I believe the Dodgers were also fairly positively leveraged. They have the top leverage score on both sides, FanDuel and DraftKings. So to me, it's a bullpen game. I'm going to be treading cautiously, especially because the Dodgers bats are still really expensive. But is there any individual Los Angeles bat that stands out to you?
Trey Turner and Max Muncy, but that's kind of every day.
Yeah, that's basically we have a 3-man race for MVP in the National League at this point. It's Trey Turner, Max Muncy, Fernando Tatis. They're all heading above everybody else in terms of wins above replacement for hitters. Bryce Harper, maybe, but also the Phillies are kind of falling out of the playoff race, so that seems to be less appealing. But that is going to do it for us on the deeper dive today. The MLB Live Before Lock is coming up next. So guys, don't go anywhere, but do subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, show Eric Lindquist some love when he comes up next.
And we are live. Welcome to MLB Live Before Lock. It is Tuesday, August 24th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Eric Lindquist. We are here to take you all the way up to lock at 7:05 with a 14-game MLB slate. Going to be a good time. Shout out to OddsShopper for being the presenting sponsor of this show. Let's hit that like button. Let's run this number north of 200 now that we're starting off a new one. The boys ahead of us in the deeper dive got us to that 150 mark. We need to get up to 200. I'm not going to promise eating erasers or pencils or any sort of other weird schoolyard stuff, but my co-host for today might just do that. Eric, how are you?
You never know what I'm going to agree to do in order for the like button to be smashed. So just smash it ahead of time. Save me from myself a little bit because I'll just go to unknown places apparently. But Denver got weird, and I would say my Monday sign-off definitely got the weirdest. So good to be here with you, everybody, again, and can't wait to see you next Monday as I do dumb things again.
It's going to be great. I'm legitimately excited to watch you do this because it's just going to be gross. Not
you ate the pepper though. I mean, you went full on. The pepper has to be worse.
So it was uncomfortable, but people eat that on purpose. People like spicy food in general. It's a little bit different when it comes to chalk because the only people that eat chalk show up on My Strange Addiction.
Well, Ryan did say if we got over 400 likes today that he was going to buy donkey ears. He was going to buy a donkey headdress and ship it so that I had to wear that on Monday while I'm doing it. So I become a true chalk donkey. So if anybody wants to run that thing north of 400, I'm going to have the donkey hat on. It'll be a picture that'll probably live in infamy forever. And there's no getting away from that.
That sounds like it'll be interesting. That's for sure.
You were not a fan of anything. You just want to see me eat chalk and be miserable. That's it.
Yeah, because it's going to be miserable. I can't imagine how dry it's going to be. It's just going to immediately seize up. How much do you have to eat?
I'm just going to take a big bite into I ordered them on Amazon. And for me, I had to get something because me gnawing down on the chalk was the freakish part of the entire thing. So I had to get it thin enough where I'm going to actually be able to bite it and have it be an issue, won't be an issue to chew through it. Because the worst would be biting into it and not having it break off. Man, I thought about this way too much.
So my final question for you is this. Have you thought at all about what happens if you like it?
No.
Okay.
I assumed I would not join Klein can't breathe.
Look, there's a non-zero chance that you enjoy it.
Oh,
right?
Man.
There's a non-zero chance it's the best thing you've ever eaten.
Truly, I will be the guy who's I will try absolutely everything once. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to have to go down that path. It's there are no bounds to where that could end up, but yeah, maybe I do. I would say I will set the odds at minus 10,000 that I do not like it. So there's that, but fair enough. There's the 0.1% chance that there's no coming back from this and my intestines are just shot because chalk is incoming, but that's also me during NBA season. So it won't be any different.
Okay. Final thing. I mentioned this to Jordan after the show. I have eaten a chunk of my underwear before from losing a bet. Yeah, that's pretty much how I felt when it happened.
What?
So that is also very dry in the mouth. So just watch yourself on the chalk.
Okay, no. On purpose.
Yes, on purpose.
Was it a bet?
Yes.
Did you? What did you?
No, I was just super hungry that day and couldn't find a granola bar.
I mean, now that we're going a little sarcastic here. No, but seriously, what was the wager?
If I had to look up the game, I could find it. I want to say that it was something around the lines of a Michigan-Wisconsin college football game in the 07-08 range.
You're 20, just doing dumb
Wisconsin
things.
was up 2 touchdowns. I was with a buddy of mine that's a Michigan fan. We made the bet that Michigan would not come back. This was I want to say 5-6 minutes left in the game. They came back. They won that game. So I paid that off at his wedding, at his reception for his wedding.
That is the greatest story I've ever heard. How is chat not exploded yet? What is going on? Josh just admitted to one, eating raw underwear. Was it worn underwear?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was my underwear, so I don't feel as bad.
Oh, Chalk looks like nothing compared to whatever you just said. I mean, this is just, do you have video of it?
No.
He has to have a video.
2010, so not a lot of smartphone video going around at that time, thank God.
Yeah, a lot of razors, maybe.
My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, also there, was not happy that it happened.
I had a feeling. Yeah, it's about as well as my eyebrow shaving went here at the Lindquist household. Not fantastically well.
No, I can very much relate. Why is Andrew Velasquez showing up in 36% of my lineups?
That was the most change in topic of all time. I mean,
I just saw that he was at the top, but it didn't make any sense to me. We might as well change that topic. We're 7 minutes in. We got another hour. Look, I can answer the rest of these questions. I don't care.
I just could go on for an hour here, and I kind of want to, but I guess it is 14 games or whatever. But yeah, here we are.
Well, then let's talk a little bit. Michigan Northwestern back in 2006. Now, Cantor, definitely Wisconsin. That much I know for sure.
500 likes if Shander Show eats Josh's underwear. I think it would take like 1,000. Let's be serious here. Josh and I are just spitballing here. Shander's like a trained professional with a child. Like, we're still kind of little childs who talk about sports all day. It's lovely.
I am certainly a child in general. Let's talk a little bit about top stacks today.
Let's do it.
And let's just start it here. Who is your top stack for today?
That I have like on my board. I mean, the Angels, I do not have the Angels valued the same way that everybody else does. And I know in the top stacks, well, they're the highest ownership shares, about flat there, but there's just not a lot of guys outside of Ohtani and no Upton in the lineup. It just doesn't feel like my favorite spot here on the board. So I wanted to throw out first that I'm just by default going to be a little bit lower on them. My number one team today is Boston, and I'm just not going to be getting to them a ton either because they're going so overowned. And so, I mean, for me, it's taking the field in a lot of these spots, a lot of these positive leverage spots. And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen with this Colorado game. Yeah. Colorado yesterday should have paid everybody off 3-0 in the first inning. Ends up, Hilliard tries to turn a single into a double and gets Hendricks out of a complete jam for his life there. And he could have been out in the first inning for who knows what, and ends up only being 4 runs. But I won't be going back that direction, but a lot of positive leverage to be had there. Who's your top team?
So if I'm looking at it's a tough slate because I think that the top stack tool is largely on point. Like, I do think that it is Boston today. However, they're overowned, so that makes it a little bit difficult for me. I do think the Angels are at the top of the heap. They're my number 2, but I think they're overowned. So for me right now, number 1 team, same as it was this morning. I really like going to the Braves against Andrew Heaney. It's a lot of righty power. Heaney pulling enough ownership that I like that opposite side of leverage, but the Braves are just basically unowned. Jorge Soler at 3.8% is the most owned Brave right now on DK. That's just the direction that I'm trying to go as of right now.
Yeah, I was going to go to a lot of Colorado again on this slate, and I don't know if I'm going to get that opportunity once more to go back-to-back days there. Might save me from myself, but the other team that I'm going to in bunches is Houston. Right now, also coming in, tied with Colorado as the third highest top stack percentage. It's kind of the same thing for me yesterday. Those were the 2 teams that I was highest on. Thought that they were both going a little bit overlooked. I think they are again today, especially as you add far more teams, 8 more games into the fray as what we had yesterday. I like both of them. This Colorado weather, I doubt I'm going to get to as many as what I was hoping before. It's going to be kind of a full stack or nothing, no one-offs from that game, just in the event that this weather does come to fruition. We do have some time, so I'm not going to panic, but Houston going to probably be my second or third highest owned team on this slate. Okay,
that works for me. Talk to me a little bit about Houston here. It is a spot that I looked at a little bit earlier today. They've got the really nice implied total. Brady Singer on the opposite side. I'm giving Brady Singer a little bit more love here. I think he's better than his $5,700 price tag shows. So I'm a little bit more muted on Houston. So I'm curious your thoughts because they are number 3 in our top stack tool right now.
Yeah. So for me, the big thing with Brady Singer, he limits a lot of the hard contact. We're seeing it come on the ground here, but looking at this lineup, just some of these guys, I mean, Jake Myers has been 509 expected slugging so far here. In a limited sample, he was expected to be pretty good. He's got crazy speed as well. There's just a lot of things that he can do to kind of add to this lineup. You get some cheaper pieces to kind of combine with the expensive. I mean, we saw crazy ownership on Correa and Altuve, and both of them, again, just not guys who strike out a ton here in this spot either. I just believe in Houston and the ability that they have to generate runs in different ways, and both speed, power with Yordan Alvarez. I just think it's a team that when you see them getting around 2% ownership, you just need to, in the back of your mind, say, all right, I'm going to go way over. I guess they've gone up to 2.6% ownership share, but considering they're still the third top stack potential on the board there, getting positive leverage on them. And it's just a team that it's like with the Yankees today. I don't know how you don't go over on the Yankees and the Dodgers, two of the best lineups in baseball that did as much reworking as they did, finding some cheaper GPP darts to take some shots on pitching and get to them. Same thing with Houston, but Houston allows you to still play top tier pitching. So that's kind of why I think that they work really well in the overall, the grand scheme of this slate, and make the most sense to me as a team to go to.
Ryan Hines, thank you very much for tweeting at me here. He said that was in Ann Arbor and Rich Rod's first year, probably his biggest win of the few while at UM. Horrible game to watch. You're telling me, man. You're telling me. But I do appreciate you getting to the bottom of it. I knew somebody would, like, if you were a Michigan fan, you would remember it because it was Wisconsin. I want to say that Wisconsin was like a top 10 team at the time, and they were about to snuff them out, and they made the comeback. So
good.
Yeah. Well, it depends who you were. It wasn't a good time for me, that's for sure. Wow. Shout out to one Jim Barron for making me eat my underwear. Kudos to you, brother. Kudos to you. Any other stacks that you want to touch on? Like, how do we want to handle this big time negative leverage situation? Boston, pretty highly negative leverage. Cleveland, big time negative leverage. Baltimore, big time negative leverage. Are you doing anything with any of those teams? Is there a way to manage it? Because obviously Boston's still really good. The negative leverage isn't as bad. Baltimore, on the other hand, is not showing up with a very good top stack odds, but showing up as quite a bit overowned.
Well, it's kind of a team by team basis. So if you go in Cruncher, you're able to kind of pick and choose, specifically Cleveland for me. I mean, Ahmed Rosario has been better of late, but I'm still not going to get to much of him. I put a cap on him, but then only people that I included in my Cleveland stacks, I'm not full stacking them. I'm not going to play any 5-mans. I'm not going to compete with 10% of the field with, Cleveland bats that don't really stand out to me in a meaningful way the whole way up and down the lineup, especially the back end of that line. It makes no sense to me why we would want to get to a ton of 5-mans there. So for me, it's Rosario through Ramos, 2, 3, 4, 5, specifically though, Ramirez and Reyes from now until the end of time. They always make a great upside 2-man combination, end up being quite a bit of 5-2s that I'm doing here, but really nothing else that I want to get to in a meaningful way with that baseball team. That definitely is kind of an avoid everybody else in that lineup. Texas is the one that really just kind of was a little jarring to me. Eli Morgan isn't that bad of a pitcher, and there's really nothing here. Adolis Garcia at 2.9K is the one bat, and I understand none of them are over 3.7K. Only one is over 3K, Isaiah kind of Falefa, but wow, Texas Rangers getting this much ownership was probably the most shocking thing to see throughout the day here, and I'm just not going to get there at all. Are you?
Probably not. Just looking through the lineup now, I've got Garcia as pretty massively overowned. Nate Lowe overowned. I see the whole team largely overowned, so much so that the fact I think I have Texas as like my second worst leverage stack. They're probably kind of in the same boat for me as Cleveland and the Angels and the Red Sox, but the Red Sox, Angels, and Indians are my like 2, 3, and 4 overall, whereas the Rangers are like 15. So it's not a spot that I'm expecting to get to with any sort of major frequency. I think that they're just simply too owned. I don't mind the idea of going to Adolis Garcia in a cash game scenario for sure. But for right now, not quite for me.
It's just so easy to not make 5-mans of these guys. If you're playing 150, I'm playing 190 lineups on DK tonight. And it's just, I just think that going away from them in Cleveland, that's, 20% of the field that I don't really want to compete with. I don't need to compete with. I don't think there's enough upside there comparatively. Give me the other 26 teams on this slate where almost every single one is at least like Boston. I at least understand why the ownership's there. The Angels, I at least understand why the ownership's there. I don't get it for Cleveland and Texas. You can call people gas cans all they want, but it's just not a very good power, not a good run creation combination of teams. So like, that entire game, just write it off for me. It feels the same way that Pittsburgh and Arizona did yesterday for me, where it just didn't really make sense why it was getting so much ownership. The totals, I think they were probably appropriate, but the number of times that they're going to go out and absolutely burn you in that spot feels completely limited compared to the ownership that they're getting.
Why is Leody Taveras like not showing up when I try to do anything? Is his name spelled in different ways? Taveras, Tavares. Okay, so it's
TA.
It's Taveras in Fantasy
Yes.
Cruncher.
Mm-hmm. And that it's not that way over on DK.
That's what I'm trying to figure out because it's tripping me up, and I'm wondering if I just have
Taveras. It's not even Tavares. It's Taveras, I suppose.
It's Taveras on Fangraphs.
Mm-hmm.
It's Taveras. Okay, is that my
It's
problem
Taveras
here?
on both.
Where do I have this?
You say Taveras, I say Taveras.
Taveras. Okay, so for some reason the file that I have. So there's a.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm gonna get the name of the site wrong. There's like a baseball ID file out there that has all the Fangraph ID numbers with player names, but it also has it for like other fantasy sites. Whenever I grab that, I guess Taveras' name was spelled incorrectly because it was causing me to get him to show up in literally nothing that I'm trying to do right now. And it was creating this gigantic problem in my sheet where it wasn't adding up anything correctly in the Rangers. So I can't really wrap my head around it. But now I think I have hunted down the actual answer to this. So do you have any other stacks that you want to touch on? Anybody that stands out to you? Anybody that you're looking at thinking, this is the guy that I want to get to a little bit more today?
Just stack wise. So somebody brought up Cincinnati earlier. I mean, Cincinnati 1.3% top stack potential here. I have 0% interest in going to Cincinnati on this slate. There's just no point in doing that. I don't really see it whatsoever. Let's see. Where do I what am I also narrowing it on? Baltimore's coming in with a little bit too much leverage as well. So those are kind of the two teams. Just add them all into the pool of guys that I'm off of. Minnesota still not going to go there as well. The Dodgers, though. Let's just talk about the overall grand scheme of like the goal of fantasy baseball is to score the most fantasy points. Wouldn't you want to roster the best players and the best teams that have the upside to do such things? And I understand that it's going to be like a bullpen game. Pierce Johnson is going to go like an inning, 2 innings in this one. A bullpen game is never the most enticing thing, but at least with the Dodgers, 1 through 8, you're ridiculous. Like you're just completely stacked and nearly a 5% top stack potential, 4.8%, only 2% ownership going there. Yeah, they've got great back end of the bullpen, but some of these middle relievers here for San Diego, I just still think that they're gettable. I still think it's a team that you want to be invested in no matter what, because of how good they are 1 through 8. I'm going to be stacking them up quite a bit on this slate as well. I'm going to kind of wait for that lineup to go through. So I didn't have any individual hitters that were like popping for me out of that outside of Muncy, who is going to pop pretty much every single day for me. But yeah, the Dodgers are another team you should just be playing quite a bit of compared to what their ownership is. Completely agree.
I have them 8th overall, but 3rd in leverage. Outside of Trey Turner, no one is pulling any ownership. Everybody is sub 2%. To me, that looks great. It's not an ideal spot. You're getting the bullpen game based on Fangraph's projections of their entire bullpen. They are the 4th best bullpen in baseball. So that is muting me a little bit, probably what's keeping them 8th and not moving them up to like that number 3, number 4 range. But because of that leverage, the Dodgers are right there with the Braves. They're like a half step behind the Braves for me. And then the other team that I'm trying to get to that is pulling quite a bit of leverage, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. I don't think that I heard you say anything about them. Do you have any interest in going to the Nats today? Not the best offensive environment for Miami, but lefty matchup against Jesus Luzardo. Juan Soto is obviously the only real bat in the Nats lineup, and you get that lefty. No one's touching him, but I think that there's a little bit of value in going to the Nats. Nothing too crazy, but I do show them as under-owned by a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of 2 and 3 mans that I'm getting on DraftKings. I think that that's a sharp play. I also like playing Luzardo on the other side. We haven't talked about pitching, but I think Luzardo, obviously he had the name, the pedigree, everything was there. Only a 4.2% top pitcher percentage, but once it gets underneath 7K, I think it's pretty open. If you're trying to play some Dodgers, if you're trying to play some of the more expensive stacks on the board that are going underrepresented, I think Jesus Luzardo at least can go out there. He could absolutely get shelled, which I totally get the Washington side, and I like getting to 3 through 5 specifically. Soto, Zimmerman, Kai Boom. I mean, Kai Boom's had a little bit of pop here, 2.1K. It's kind of a nice salary saver to kind of get to him. Makes a good one-off if you're trying to find a little bit of savings elsewhere for your lineup. 447 expected slugging here so far, but Soto left on left. He always goes a little bit, every left on left for whatever reason goes a little bit underrepresented. So I think the Soto play specifically just jumps off the screen for me. 535 expected slugging still in the season. So I love what you're getting to there. The rest of the pieces, whether it's Thomas, Escobar, nobody really goes crazy for me there. Trace Barrera, you can definitely play at a catcher spot. You can just include him in a stack and whatever. So I guess that would make some sense too, but specifically 3 through 5 is where I'm targeting that. I'm getting to quite a bit of Soto. I'm nearly 10% on him, kind of a bigger stand that I'm taking just from a tournament perspective.
I want to hit on one super chat that we got a little bit ago from Isaiah Gale. He said, when checking out top stacks, what do you look for? Is it the leverage and is it positive or negative? So it's a little bit of a combination of both, not the positive and negative, but you're looking at two separate things. You want to defer to high top stack over low top stack percentage just out of the gate. In theory, you want high top stack and positive leverage. That is the best combination that you can get to. So on a day like today, if we're just using the top stack tool, Houston is 4th, the Dodgers are 5th, but they both have pretty sizable positive leverage numbers. To me, those are the first two teams that I'm looking at in a larger field GPP. But for Boston and for the Angels, they're the number 1 and number 2 stacks. They're both really good options, and you should be playing guys from the Angels and the Red Sox. And the negative leverage matters, but it just matters in the way of making sure you know what's in the rest of your lineup. You don't want to go to a Red Sox stack in a large field GPP. You don't want to go to a Red Sox stack with like Corbin Burns and Jack Flaherty as your two pitchers. You want to try to get a little away from the public ownership a little bit. Whereas if you go to, say, the Dodgers, for example, then a Corbin Burns, Jack Flaherty combination, if that's feasible given salary. But a Corbin Burns, Jack Flaherty scenario is a lot better because you're not competing with anybody because the Dodgers ownership is super low. So it's really a balancing act. But top stack, very high. Leverage, you want to be positive. Hopefully both of those things happen at the same time.
You said it perfectly when you threw in the large field. So when we're talking about large fields, the reason that we want to stack against popular pitchers is that not only do you get the benefit of the failure on one end, but you're getting the positive perks of a good performance on the other one. And when you're talking about these large fields specifically, like if you're playing 100-man, it's going to be very difficult to not be different on a 14-game slate unless you're just looking at a specific site, playing the same projections, and you're not stacking. You're doing something ridiculous that you don't do for baseball. So I think you brought it. I think you explained that absolutely perfectly. We look at the leverage. The leverage also, though, you have to look at what the salaries are. We play a salary cap game. I can't just jam the best pitchers with the best stacks. That's what makes it so intriguing. And so the reason that you see the Dodgers or some of these top offenses, the Yankees, that are going in so overlooked is simply because on this slate, pitching is the priority more so than just, plugging in the best offensive teams, because there's going to be so many other teams that have the potential of scoring 10 or 12 runs. So you're looking at more of the value options. And so it's kind of a balancing act. And you're always trying to find that little pocket where you can get a little bit different, get away from what the field is doing. And that's going to be over a long haul, how you realize profits in baseball.
There it is, everybody. And we're up over 212 likes, and we didn't have to eat chalk or anything like that.
Or underwear. Wow. I mean, I just said that, and it's true. It's absurd.
Look, that's a bet you make when you're 22 years old and not a bet you make when you're 36, because there's no chance I would do that again.
Yeah, there's no chance your wife would. It would hurt a lot more at 36 than it would at 22 when you're, with your girlfriend. It's a different thing.
Honestly, at this point, she would probably just leave me and be like, I don't care. Like, just do whatever you want to do. Don't bring me into this. I'm going back to the bar. Whereas at that time, she was very much rallying against it.
It's beautiful.
Anyway, schedule for the rest of the night. That's it. There's nothing. We're done. This is the last show for the night, but you should go and watch any VOD content from this channel, from Awesemo Odds, from the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. We got a ton that you could possibly be watching. So you should do that. Free content, though. This one, a little bit more up your alley, folks. MLB player projections. If you are looking to play today, if you're playing DFS, and I assume if you're listening to Live Before Lock, that's something you're doing. And if that's not the case, thank you for being here. That's really cool that you would watch if you're not playing. Player projections are free. Use those. Either grab the link from Nightbot or just go to Awesemo.com and browse to our player projections. They are free. PGA Top Golfers free as well for BMW, correct?
Yes, sir. It's gonna be a fun tournament. New golf course. Always kind of adds a new caveat to it where you can really play the ownership game and you can build based on types of players. And we had a great show today. Ben and I, we're going to be running it back tomorrow for Live Before Lock. So check it out. We'll have some final runs to go over.
Yeah, no Jason Roslin right now. So congrats to him, by the way.
Congrats, my dude.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine he's watching this show right now, but
he wanted to go back to work today. He was just like, yeah, I'll get on a show. I'm like, no, yeah, trust me.
Take a break, bro.
Yeah, just chill out. So,
all righty. Let's talk a little bit about pitching now. So we've got Corbin Burns, we've got Jack Flaherty, both pulling the aggressive amounts of ownership on DraftKings, close to 40%. We've got German Marquez and Charlie Morton in the 20s. I'm going to give you those guys first. How are you feeling about those first four majorly owned guys today?
So I feel very good about Corbin Burns up against Cincinnati. I feel less good about Jack Flaherty. And not just because of the ownership, 9,600. He has been out of his mind since he got back. And it's a very limited sample here for Jack Flaherty. And like rightfully so. I think he should be garnering attention. But for whatever reason, it's 2 starts. We're looking at a 2-start sample against Kansas City, which I went over a lot of their issues yesterday against right-handed pitching. And, you know, they only strike out at a 21.8% clip, but they only have a WRC plus of 86, one of the worst in baseball against righty pitching, tied for 4th, up and down in that. Just you also are taking Soler out of that lineup. Just not a very good team altogether. So Kansas City, that's a fantastic result for him there. And Milwaukee, he ran into some trouble. He still got there in the K department, 8 Ks, but gave up 2 homers in that in 6 innings. I understand it's Detroit, and we've seen some massive upside from guys like, I don't know, frickin' Cal Quantrill against Detroit lately. We've seen this Detroit lineup, you know, be very feast or famine, 3.2 implied runs here. It points in that direction. It's still 85 degrees with 10 mile an hour wind blowing out. I think there's enough power that there could still be. I'd rather just go to a lot more of the field. Like if you're playing single entry, if you're playing cash, like, yeah, Jack Flaherty makes a lot of sense, but for tournament purposes, I get a little worried looking at that. I was planning on being heavy on Marquez. I think I'm going to have to probably be hitting eject on that based on the weather. So I think just right from the get-go, very high on Burns. I'll be over the field. And Flaherty, I'm going to be shorter, not just because of tournaments, but I actually have some legit concerns.
I don't know what to make of him. As of right now, I think that he is properly owned, and that's how I'm moving forward. Similar story for Burns. I don't have much to say there. My biggest differentiator, and I guess I'm bringing someone in that we haven't talked about, is Jose Barrios. He's at 7% ownership. I actually think that should be more in the 20s. So that is a spot that I'm looking to go to that is at least a little bit different at pitcher, because I agree with Burns. I agree with Flaherty. I agree with the Marquez ownership. I agree with Morton. Like, all those guys make sense to me. I do have concerns about Flaherty, but I do think that the upside in this spot against an absolutely dreadful Tigers lineup, I have them projected for 3.1 runs. That's actually where the implied run total is. It's kind of crazy how bad it is. I mean, we've got 4 guys in their lineup with a 78 weighted runs created plus or lower. That doesn't include Casey Mize, who has to bat in the spot against the Cardinals. So I think he's in such a good spot because there are basically 5 spots in their lineup that are dead zones. So I can't get too worried about, like in a cash game, definitely want to have him. I don't really see a way around it, but Barrios is the guy that I'm looking at from a try to get different in a GPP scenario. Is he somebody you looked at?
Little bit. I'm going to get to a little bit of him. For me, a lot of the guys that I'm going to, though, just for tournament sake, are under the 7K. There's like a cliff when it starts with like McGill and works itself down from the 7K mark on down. Who did you see one more time? I'm not even going to lie. I missed it.
No worries. Jose Barrios against the White Sox.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do Barrios. So as a Twins fan, not a guy. This is the first year we've really seen the K percentage spike up there. I tried to pull an Adam Scherer where I could just like seamlessly blow through it there, but I had an issue with my CSV and kind of freaked out for a second. And, you know, look at me, just such a great actor. Oh my God. Let's see.
I've done 3 years worth of shows with Adam. I am plenty familiar with people not listening to me as I speak.
But I'm like, I have that Midwestern guilt where if I don't hear what you say, I should just simply ask it back. It's not that hard. And instead I tried to cover and here we are. But
I know the feel. Look, live before lock, we're both trying to do a lot of stuff. You got some moving pieces. Trust me. I get it, man.
Could have made fewer lineups on both sites would have been a good idea. But, I haven't figured that one out. It's still like, I want to get my exposure in on everything. You study it all day. You want to be able to put it together. But for Toronto here, like Jose Berrios, this is the first year. So I'm pulling up his entire career, 24.8% K percentage on the season. What he's always done is he's limited walks and he limits hard contact. So that's what makes him such a good real life pitcher. From a fantasy perspective, this is the first time we've really seen the K percentage from what I recall. So going through, at 25.1%, I guess last year, it's just kind of like slowly spiked up through his career here. And part of that too is that hitters have been more aggressively aiming for homers. They don't really care about strikeouts as much. And it seems like from sample size, you're looking back to 2015, 2016 up until now, the major thing he's done is he just limits walks. But looking at his expected ERA, 4.17, he's got an ERA of 3.52. I think he's been a little bit lucky this season. Not a very good he's a very good real life pitcher, not a very good fantasy pitcher. 24.8%. It always seems like his salary is just a little bit too high for me to get there in a meaningful way. Now, there's definitely some positive leverage to be had with him today. The Chicago White Sox, this isn't a lineup that people would want to be picking on very much for sure, but there's some sneaky upside there, but a 107 WRC plus against righties, 23.5% K percentage, both kind of middle of the road, actually a little bit better for WRC plus, which is obviously on a scale to 100. I don't want to go crazy with it if I'm you, but I totally understand where these other pitchers are just getting so much ownership that why not side with the one guy who's going under 10%?
Yeah, and that's basically what it is. So he showed up in my Sims actually around 22% with 7% ownership. Yeah, so I look at him as a very high upside option in a GPP because this White Sox lineup has a ton of strikeouts. So Berrios projects via Steamer with a 25% K rate. This White Sox lineup as a whole projects with a 25% strikeout rate. Lubob, Moncada, Brian Goodwin, Jake Lamb, Zach Collins, all 26% or higher in Steamer strikeout rate. And that says nothing for like Abreu or Eloy Jimenez being in the 23s. Like there aren't any. Danny Mendick at 21% in Steamer is the lowest strikeout rate, and his is basically average. So while I do think that the ability to get blown up in this spot is here, it's not a great park factor for homers, which is helpful. There's a ton of power for the White Sox, but if this goes wrong, I don't really care if Berrios has 10 points or like -5. It doesn't really matter to me. If it goes right for him, I think there's like 10 strikeout upside in a day like today with this White Sox lineup. And that's sort of the thing that I'm trying to uncover. 22% might be a little aggressive, but if he's 7% owned, I'd be happy in that 15 to 20 range.
Well, the nice thing too for you is this is a 14 gamer. So if you want to play 15% of Berrios, you can play 3% White Sox and you're over the field on that too. So it's not too hard to leverage yourself without giving up any equity whatsoever. Like you're still in a good spot. Oh my God, please don't die.
Just a little bit of water down the wrong pipe.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, either way, I would have to keep talking, I suppose. I don't know. What do we do? What do we do if you die on stream? I feel like you, of all people, would be the best in the situation that if I were to just like randomly die on stream, you'd be like, all right, well, in my Sims, we have Eric dying 14% of the time, and we would, want to be stacking against him in that spot. And
I thought you were about to tell me that I would be the best to die on the stream, which was definitely not the direction I wanted you to go with that.
I'm definitely the favorite in that regard. Definitely the favorite. I'm about to eat chalk on Monday. Yes, I am the favorite.
Oh, yeah, you may die because of that. That's for sure. That's for sure. Although if the prices in the Treeverse keep going up, I might be the one that dies on this stream, but that's neither here nor there. All right. So we talked a lot about the higher owned pitchers. What are you doing for value from a pitching perspective? Because Eric Fede is projected for 15% ownership at 7,300. No one else in double digits below that price tag. Are you paying down anywhere?
Yeah, I'm paying down a lot. So Corbin Burns, So Corbin Burns, I'm playing. I talked about Jesus Luzardo. Obviously, it's an uncomfortable play. I don't feel fantastic about it, but still nearly 5% of the time you're seeing him end up optimal. And you don't even need to have like the optimal duo of pitchers on a slate this big, you can kind of take your scatter shots and try to, hope that it ends up with the stacks that are just going a little bit overowned. And if you get down to that value and the Dodgers go off, if the Toronto Blue Jays go off, the Astros for me, for sure, if they go off, I could be in a really good spot. I'm curious. You haven't said Dylan Bundy's name yet. And I think we were on the show last week and you said Dylan Bundy. And I actually had him grade out about middle of the pack for me today, which at 5,800 is a very, very useful thing. Going up against this Baltimore team that we've been picking on more and more, only 62 and 63 pitches his last two out, but he wasn't very good in either one of those outings either.
No.
If he gets out to like a hot start, has the ability, he had 84 pitches on the 5th of August. So I think 80 plus is in consideration at 5,800. It's a play that gets me to my stacks. And if he can give me 15, 20, I think having more than 1% of him makes some sense.
I will say this. He is my highest rated pitcher below Fede. He showed up in 8% of lineups. So I don't disagree. Big. I'm in. That works for me. It's not exciting, but like I have him projected for 13 fantasy points. Everybody else in that range is like 10, 9, 7 for Griffin Jacks. So I get it. I just didn't want to advocate too hard because
I'll do it for you this time around. Even the last time I vehemently disagreed with you, I'm there today.
Okay, well then we're on the same page then. Yeah, look, large field stuff, even like just bigger, nothing too good. He wouldn't be a starter for me in a single lineup. Let's say that. But I don't really have a ton of pay down. I think it's pretty easy to stay at the top. The way that I have it right now, I have 144% of the 200% of my sims at Herman Marquez or above.
Okay.
And ownership in that range is 139. So I'm a little bit ahead of the field on everything at the top end. So for me right now, if I'm going down to the bottom, trying to unearth some value, I am with you. It's Dylan Bundy.
Tyler McGill too, 6,900. He hasn't been as good of late, but that's got to be somebody that you at least consider underneath 7K. Going up against San Francisco, another boomer bust team, similar to the Yankees, where they can definitely get you, but there's definitely upside if he's on there. 6 strikeouts his last 2, 3.21 ERA, 1.16 WHIP on the season. Good surface stats. Not so good on the old underlying metrics, but still going to be getting to a guy who's limiting batters to a 194 expected batting average. He can give up some high hard contact, 40.3% hard hit percentage, 14.6 degree launch angle, but 194 expected batting average underneath 7K and stretched out. He could just pitch deep into this one, get you 5 or 6 strikeouts, and under 7K, I'm willing to take some shots there too. So last guy I wanted to touch on.
He's properly owned for me at 5%. Like he showed up at the exact ownership number. Same for Bumgarner, same for Brubaker, same for Luzardo. Like these guys are 4% owned, 5% owned, 6% owned. I landed on those same numbers. Dylan Bundy is the one that's not pulling any ownership that actually separated from the pack.
Okay. Dylan Bundy. I was going to say, I remember that very vividly from last week. And it was just weird to have him show up in as many lineups as what I had today. So
any other pitchers you want to touch on?
We talked about Charlie Morton a little bit, didn't we? Or did we not?
Not really.
Not really. Okay. So Charlie Morton, I think, is just going a little bit over owned. Okay. Just slightly. Like it's an important talking point because the Yankees on one side, sure. I mean, this is a tougher matchup for them too, but Yankees are going completely over owned here. And as I'm going through it, I'm just talking myself into a little bit more of them as we go. Just so much upside. If I'm going to like the Dodgers for certain reasons, obviously it's a different scenario with a bullpen game and Charlie Morton, who limits hard contact, keeps it on the ground, 7.6 degree average launch angle and a 28.4% K percentage. I see the strikeouts being there for sure. But 21%, he's going a little, doubly over owned on our top 2 pitcher percentage. So for me, that's kind of like a cap at 10%, move on with your day and just getting to a couple more Yankees bats.
We had him owned 21% of the time on the last go round. He showed up in 15% of my sim. So I am with you that I would be a little lighter on the field.
Okay. Yeah. It just seemed like he was like the 3rd or 4th highest owned pitcher. And I mean, for me, it's just getting overweight on Corbin Burns. I'm going to have him in at least half my lineups. Jack Flaherty, I just have enough concerns on where in a tournament, like just being half of that, having 20%, 25% feels pretty good to me, especially, I guess the hard part is if we lose Marquez here now, that becomes really difficult to kind of justify why I would want to be lower there. I'm just willing to kind of inherit some of that risk, being able to get off of the amount of ownership going his way, not getting to necessarily as much Marquez, but kind of scattershotting along that underneath 7K range. I feel a little bit better doing that than probably you do, like the Luzardo, the Bundy, all of those guys. I'm happy to get over the field on all of them.
How are you, I guess we should probably touch on it right now since I think we've wrapped up pitching. How are you approaching this Cubs-Rockies game right now? Because obviously Marquez is there and relevant. I do think the Rockies are a pretty highly rated stack too. So how are you handling the game?
So, I mean, we've still got some time here. I took them out of my pool and I'll be able to hand build. I don't want to go back in and just hit the late swap optimize and try to figure it out that way. I'll probably hand edit a few of my Dodger stacks to kind of mix and match. I'll get to some Marquez plus Rockies, but right now, completely off on making them any of my short stacks. They're not going to be any 2-mans, 3-mans of the Rockies, no one-offs. It's going to be an all stack or nothing for the most part. And I think that's probably the right approach when you have this much weather and this many issues. I mean, we're seeing around a couple of spots. The local news guy was in the chat. We were going back and forth. He sent me over some stuff and he's always keeping an eye on that for us. 30% PPD risk it's looking like from a couple spots and 60% win. I mean, those are gigantic numbers. And I just think there's so many spots to be going to. Yeah, I really like Colorado, but if they're still going to be 2-3% owned, maybe just being lighter in the event that it's a near 50% postponed risk. I mean, that just seems a little lofty for me to inherit that risk.
I'm just going to approach it with late swap in mind. To me, like the Rockies are pretty neutral. Marquez is the guy that you need to swap out of, but with Marquez at 8,200, I mean, there's not a lot that you can naturally just drop down to. If you have any extra money, obviously hopping up is going to be your better bet. But if you need to drop down to someone a little bit more viable, so that game kicks off at what, 8:05, correct?
Yep.
So you would have not a lot of options. You would have to go to the Brady Singers and Pierce Johnsons of the world. So basically Brady Singer. Is it 8:05? Yeah, it is 8:05. Okay, so you don't have a late swap unless you get that information before like 7:45.
Oh no, you're super screwed. Like you're
tricky.
Outrageously screwed. And I'm telling you right now, Marquez, as I'm looking around the industry, as I'm looking at our ownership form right now, 23%. That's slowly been sliding down here as the weather concern is there. He's still going to be 15%, 20% owned. I mean, if that ends up getting postponed, that's your rake for the night. And giving yourself every other pitcher on the slate, I'm happy to say that, you know what, even Marquez could get this game started. They end up having an in-game delay and then you lose them that way. So there's a lot of ways that this goes south on you. And I'm just kind of willing to hit eject on it right now. If this were like 6-7 games, I would be a little bit more patient with it, but there's really no purpose for me to wait around on it. And if I want to build a couple stacks here coming into the late night hammer, sure, why not?
Did you say porpoise? Is this like meow?
Yes. Yeah. I'm already like tasting the chalk. It's already there. Affecting my speaking. Yeah. When you mentally think about it, it's really stupid what I did.
It's great. Anything for content, man.
Yeah, call me. Here we go.
Yeah. Soul Dope with the super chat. Best GPP pitchers and favorite stacks on FanDuel.
Okay. So GPP, I mean, we both, Corbin Burns is my favorite pitcher for everything. I don't care about the ownership. I don't care about anything. He's the best pitcher on this slate, and I'm just going to play a ton of him. My guy is Jesus Luzardo. I'm nearly over 15% on a guy that's around 4% right now. So I would say that that's one of my bigger stands that I've got going up against Washington. I'm still overweight on Washington on the other side, specifically that 3-5 we talked about. And then favorite stacks, GPP. I love Houston, love the Dodgers. And then we didn't even talk about them in depth too much. Well, I mean, Washington, you brought up, and I still like the other side of that one too. But Colorado, if they're going to be completely unknown, having even like 2 or 3%, I'm actually going to keep these stacks. Again, I'm not going to play any one-offs, no 2-mans, no 3-mans, but Colorado is going to be really low owned on the one side. And, in-game delays do not affect your hitters.
So Corbin Burns is at the top of the list for me for FanDuel from a pitching perspective as well. Top stacks, we're going to say Houston, Dodgers, Rays, and Braves. They would be the 4 that I would be looking at for a FanDuel side.
Loves it.
6:46. We got about 20 minutes to go before we get to lock. So we got to talk at least a little bit about our fantasy football draft kit for season long and for best ball. Use the promo code WR. Same projections and tools and analysis that go into our NFL DFS fantasy stuff. But now you get access to Draft Wingman. Awesome tool, which I was able to use on Monday for a live draft. Check that video out on the Fantasy Football channel. You get best ball rankings and a stacking guide, trade value chart, and more. $35 credit, up to a $35 credit for underdog and FFPC leagues. So you can get 33% off using that promo code WR. That's less than $10 for everything we have for season long and best ball because, man, the NFL is fast approaching. Are you excited?
Oh, dude, I'm so excited. So I just started a TikTok today, which is a weird thing to say out loud, but I started a good old TikTok, Eric Lindquist DFS, if you want to check it out. I'm going to be doing a series called Sleeper Walking. Well, so we're, instead of sleepwalking, we are just taking a walk in the world. I'm going to go golfing with it. I'm going to go to the coffee shop with it. I'm going to walk around and talk fantasy football for a minute, give you a snippet. Today, obviously covered Travis Etienne, how to handle that situation in best ball, how to handle it in your year-long leagues. So take a look at that. That's going to be a fun times. Hopefully you guys can check that out. And then obviously I'm going to have a ton of articles that are coming out here. I'm going to be doing the sleepers and the bust rankings. I'm going to have the how to draft out of every single spot in your year-long leagues. We're going to cover half point and full point PPR, how to handle those, starting with the number 1 spot coming out here tomorrow. So check out all of that content. We are time to rock.
I know. For NFL season, I'll be doing, I assume, the recap show again with Laffy and Adam, but Showdown's my bag. So contenders videos for Thursday nights, for Sunday nights, for Monday nights. I'll be cranking out tons of Showdown video content.
Look at you. I love it.
All right. It is that time. It is the time to go position by position. Are you ready?
Ready as you nibbling on frickin' Haynes, I guess. Let's go.
It was, they were polo. Actually,
you have to remember
Hanes.
The color. They were what?
They were Haynes.
They were Haynes. Oh, but how did I know that? That's disgusting.
Well, so I used to work in a shipping warehouse for Haynes, Polo, something else that I can't remember off the top of my head right now. So I definitely did take some things from work while I was there in order to have those things. So
you would never do that.
They would have been the 2 that existed. Anyway, let's start here at the catcher spot. Give me the preferred cash game catcher and your favorite GPP catcher.
So Wilson Ramos would probably be your cash game catcher. I mean, he's batting 5th, 2,700. I don't know how you get away from that. My favorite, I mean, for me personally, I've talked myself into a little Trace Barrera as I'm going in through this Washington. I'm trying to make some 4 and 5 mans over on FanDuel. Oh, 5 mans on DK, 4 mans work on FanDuel here. I like the 4-man builds a lot more than I'm getting over on FanDuel, but getting some Trace Barrera in your life at 2,200, that's a lot of savings. Gets you off of that Pozo ridiculousness at 2,100. He's batting in the 7 hole for Texas, coming in with quite a bit of ownership comparatively for this slate. So I'm going to a little bit of Trace Barrera. Thanks for getting me on the Nationals now too.
Yeah, we'll see how that shakes out. I don't remember if I bet on them or not. Wilson Ramos, I agree, at the top of the heap from a cash game perspective. Travis d'Arnaud is my number 1 GPP option. He's actually my number 2 catcher overall, only 3% ownership. So that is a relationship I would be happy to get to from a one-off perspective.
Nice.
I should actually find out who I did bet on.
Seems important.
Well, I put it all in at like 8:00 in the mornings, or probably even earlier than that. So I just don't remember everything that ended up being out there right now. I'm probably going to just say some things and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm against that. Let's see. Under in the Angels Orioles game.
Okay.
Under in the Nats Marlins game.
Like that.
Twins money line and Twins on the run line. So shout out to David exposing the motive, says Minnesota Jake's going off. I hope you're right. Marlins outright, Royals money line and run line, Cubs money line, Rangers money line and run line, Rays money line, and Royals money line and run line. So that should be fun.
Nice. I was going to say there's a lot of things that I liked in there for sure. It's it's one of those things like this Washington Miami game. It's just the times that I think Jesus Luzardo goes off, probably going to work out well. The times he doesn't, he's going to get obliterated. So why not take the under there? If I might actually have to click on that too. I've got 14 minutes. I'll slip that in. I'll do that.
And you can also slip in your favorite first base cash option and GPP option.
You're a pro. Shohei Ohtani, first base outfield eligible, whatever direction you want to go with that. Yeah. I think Jared Walsh makes more sense if you're going to play him clean up for cash. I think that's play Ohtani in your outfield, play him at first base. I didn't play cash today, but I was kind of mixing with a build just to be able to talk about it. And, Ohtani, I think it's pretty easy to get both of them in there, even with Burns, so long as, it's Burns and Flaherty are your pitchers. And that's pretty straightforward. You can save it catcher, you can save it the outfield, but Ohtani, Walsh, in whichever direction would be your cash game plays. For GPPs, God, this is ridiculous. I gave the thumbs up to some of these dudes on the Washington side. Now I'm getting just way too much Zimmerman. So I got to kind of mute that. But Anthony Rizzo, my favorite tournament play on the entire board, coming in underneath 4%, going up against Atlanta. They're the road team, going up against Charlie Morton. Nobody's going to click on that. Nobody's going to click on his name, but I absolutely love getting over the field on any kind of a guy with that much power. Lefty gets the platoon advantage. Sign me up for Rizzo.
You said Ohtani and Walsh for cash. They are number 1 and number 2 out of my model. So I agree with you. Number 1 GPP options for me. It's a bit of a tie. Taylor Motter at the flat 2K is popping a little bit. Not enough ownership in my opinion, but Max Muncy, 1% owned last run, 5,500. He would be my preferred GPP option. Don't think anybody's going to be mad about that one.
Nope. No, they are not.
Second base, cash option, GPP option.
All right. So starting second base, Kiki Hernandez, 4,900 is probably going to be one guy a lot of people are going to. If I were playing cash, would go to Jorge Polanco. I would need the savings, 3,700. Him or Tommy Edman, either direction you want to go. I just think Minnesota at Boston, getting that road number. I think even that half inning just guaranteed for Jorge Polanco gives me the edge. I don't need that $100 over Edman, but I would probably need the 1,200 to go from Kiki and go down there. Trey Turner, my highest owned second baseman.
So I'm with you on Kike Hernandez. He's got the most ownership, second in my entire model. So that usually jives as the perfect cash option. I think Polanco would be the other backup there. Ozzie Albies, number 1 in my model, only 4% owned, showed up 11% of the time. So I'm obviously high on the Braves for today against Heaney, but Albies is the preferred GPP one-off.
It's so crazy to me. He defies everything that I kind of like. Every time I look at his splits, he only has a 37.9% hard hit percentage on the season. I mean, it's the lowest on the usual suspects for the Braves. I mean, I don't put Travis d'Arnaud in that grouping, but amongst all the Braves, by far hits the ball the softest, but still has a 451 expected slugging. Helps to be fast too.
Doesn't hurt, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Friend of the program, Jake Hari in chat says that I am a noted Max Muncy fan from day one. That is an incredibly true statement. Incredibly true. I was the only guy rallying for him for the longest time.
It's fun.
Let's move on to third base here. Who is your preferred cash and GPP options at third?
I mean, you've got two guys getting a ton of ownership, and I think it's more to do with tournaments and Devers and Ramirez. I mean, Philip Gosselin, I wouldn't want to stack cash by any means. And he's just a play that I'm always lighter on than the field. Whenever the Angels end up being popular, just doesn't have a crazy amount of pop. His ISO is under 1 on the season. It's under 1. It's like 0.1 or something like ridiculous like that. So I do not want to be going his direction as well. So more of me talking off of those three that I would want to be going to. I think Luis Ariz for cash games, 2,900. He has an under a 10% K percentage. And you want to just talk about accumulating points in cash. Luis Ariz would give you some savings, allow you to do whatever you wanted with all your other bats. So I think from a cash game perspective, he would be somebody that I would land on. For tournaments, my favorite guy has to be now. God, I do not want to even say this out loud, but Austin Riley going up against Heaney, just because I don't want people to play in 5,100. I want to keep him all to myself. Austin Riley, just a noted lefty killer.
I like it. You said Devers, Ramirez, Gosselin out of the gate. They are my 1, 2, and 3. They are the 3 most owned. So if you have the money, Devers or Ramirez are going to be your preferred guys. If you don't and you're looking for savings, it ends up being Gosselin. I mentioned Muncy at first base before, but also works at third from a GPP perspective. Justin Turner, also not owned, a spot that I would like to go. And Austin Riley, I will also mention him. They are my 3 most under-owned guys at third. We move now to shortstop. Who you got?
Somebody said that I always say Kiki. Yeah, it's Kike. I apologize. My apologies. I understand that he played it for the Dodgers forever, and he was good people out here. We miss him in LA, but anyway, 2 shortstop we go. For again, Trey Turner was the guy that before he ended up getting moved to second base was kind of the easy plug and play. Not going to be as high on Seager here for cash game purposes. I think it's got to be Rosario at 4K. He just gives you a little bit of savings off of those other 2 dudes. 5K and 5,600 for Story and Bogarts. Story, that ownership is going to come down drastically if that weather is any kind of a problem. So just be on the lookout for that. For tournaments, though, we haven't even brought up his name whatsoever, but he's just somebody that you should get to in tournaments whenever he's under 10%. Fernando Tatis going up against Julio Urias, a fantastic pitcher, but lefty gets the platoon advantage. San Diego, not the best ballpark, but that's never mattered for one Fernando Tatis who murders baseballs.
Story, Bogarts, Rosario are the 3 top guys. So you've already mentioned them. I think Bogarts is probably the preferred cash option because of Story's weather concerns. Bogarts is probably that guy, but Rosario, if you need the savings. And then I've got a bundle of GPP options. Marcus Semien, 5,100. Corey Seager, 4,900. Wander Franco, 5,200. Dansby Swanson, 5,300. You could pay up to guys that are getting basically no ownership today at short, and it's pretty easy.
I just love that Jordan Klein knows that that today is my Chick-fil-A day. I don't know how he remembers these things. It's so we're so intimately like we get each other. It's absolutely Chick-fil-A day.
So you get Chick-fil-A every Tuesday?
Every Tuesday. Every Sunday is Chipotle day, and every Tuesday is Chick-fil-A day.
Interesting.
God, love this, man.
What's your go-to Chick-fil-A meal?
Oh, it's always the 30-piece nugget, and then you can save some for the next day. So you get 8 sauces as opposed to just 3. So you only get 3 sauces when you order with Postmates, and you get the 12. So we just order a 30, and I'll either split some with my fiance. She's gone tonight, so I get to chomp down half of them, and then I get half for tomorrow. Look at this, man. He gets the same order. Jordan Klein, he just put up his Postmates screen. We are sickos, but you get 8 sauces as opposed to just 3. It's simple math, isn't it? It's simple math.
Okay, so we got a lot to break down here. First and foremost, your best bet now, just buy the sauces. I have 3 separate Chick-fil-A sauces in my fridge. Chick-fil-A sauce, Polynesian, and honey mustard.
Oh,
I can take or leave most of that, but no. Anyway, not important. Anyway, 30 nuggets. Do you
eat underwear? What do you know?
That's fair. Would have been a lot better with a little Chick-fil-A sauce.
I eat chalk, yeah.
Don't be afraid to dip.
Dip the chalk.
You got it.
I figured it out.
How much, you don't have to tell me the delivery fees and stuff. How much is the 30-piece nugget? Because my personal go-to, not Chick-fil-A, I get the 20-piece nugget from McDonald's a lot, but Chick-fil-A is closer to my house. So if I need to make a switch to the 30-piece nugget at Chick-fil-A, I am not going to be upset about that decision.
Jordan Klein has it up there. I think it was like $7.99 for the 12-piece. I think it's like $15.99 or $20. Okay, it's 20, but that's inflated. So the Postmate price is like $2 more than what it is at the Chick-fil-A. Sometimes, it's only like a mile away from me. I should probably just go pick it up sometimes, but I'm probably going to just sit here and make baseball lineups. Let's be serious. But it's probably, I don't know. So it's $20 for that. I usually end up getting some waffle fries. Once in a while, I add in the fruit because, that's those little mandarin oranges are delicious and they're nutritious and they're good for you and they're lovely. So I do that as well. Usually ends up being around $30 with the Diet Coke to finish it all off.
I'm looking it up now. I need to know how much it is. So the grilled nuggets or regular nuggets?
Regular nuggets. So the grilled nuggets are great, but I always think like I can just make chicken breast or something. Oh, what'd you find out?
$14.50 here.
Oh God, I love North Carolina. Welcome to LA, where the players play and we ride on them things like every day. That's not how it goes, but it's fine.
Next time I'm hungry and McDonald's nuggets are coming in, which is usually like every like 7 to 10 days, I'm going Chick-fil-A 30-pack because 20 is usually like nice.
Don't say I never did anything for you, Josh Engleman. Don't say I never did anything for you.
Let's close this out. Outfielders, give me your favorites today.
So I have one-off from Baltimore, and that is one Cedric Mullins that I'm getting to quite a bit. So for tournaments, I will throw him out there. I just poo-pooed on Baltimore, but he doesn't count because he doesn't play for Baltimore. He plays for like another baseball team because he's actually good, and everybody else on that team completely sucks. So going up against Dylan Bundy on one side of it, 88 degrees, happy to get to them, having a little bit of leverage over top of these Angels bats. But of course, you play Ohtani in that outfield. He's like a cash game staple. We can go through a number of these other dudes. Let me just get to my fantasy cruncher to go through it. Kyle Schwarber's like a cash game lock at 4,500, probably your first batter you're clicking on for your outfield, and then kind of making it a little bit more price sensitive where you need to go. You brought up Adolis Garcia, 2,900, Miles Strauss, 2,800. Both of them work to give you some savings if you want to pay up other places. For me, though, Shohei Ohtani, just make way for him in your cash games and be lighter in tournaments. I don't see any way around it.
I'm going to skip my thoughts here so I could hit on Lear's super chat. He said, explain ownership differences between high and low stakes. So it's a little different for both sides. So high stakes is going to look a little bit, generally speaking, a little bit more like a cash game build. You're going to get a lot more concentration in ownership to the guys that are pulling the most ownership. So if you look at our ownership projections in a high stakes contest, because the contest size is also going to be a little bit smaller, you're going to see the chalkier guys be even more chalky. Low stakes is different in two ways. So if it's low stakes and a small contest, it's still going to be pretty concentrated at the top. If it's low stakes and a large field contest, then you're looking at a bit flatter ownership. You're not going to get the same sort of extremes. So the contests, there aren't large field high dollar contests. Like that doesn't really there's not crazy high entry $200 contest that doesn't really exist, except for like millies and stuff like that for specialty weeks. So high stakes, you're just seeing more ownership, generally speaking. We got to give dong picks. People want these things. 703.
Love these.
Who you got? Who's donging today?
Okay. Well, I mean, is taking the chalk with Shohei Ohtani allowed? I'm not going to probably do that because if
anybody's going to take the chalk, it's yours. It's you, man. So
I've heard that right. And I'm really going to earn it on Monday. Why don't we go to Nelson Cruz? I don't understand why he's underneath 6% on any slate where he's facing a lefty. So I want to say Nelson Cruz, 5,200 going up against Philly here, going up against Suarez. I feel like he's going to go yard.
You can have the Ohtani. I will go to Jared Walsh, third in my model behind Ohtani, and a man who has not homered for the Red Sox, Kyle Schwarber.
Oh, my. Here we go. Yeah, it's so weird, too, because I needed him to do a lot of things yesterday, and he did none of the things. Don't captain that guy right now. What a bum.
Soul Dope with another super chat. I don't think we're going to end up getting this in the way that's going to help you. Barrios, Bumgarner, or Garcia on FanDuel. I would probably say Barrios, Garcia,
but I'll go Garcia.
Bumgarner.
You'll go Barrios, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but I have both of those guys as the same, so I don't care. It's definitely not Bumgarner. And thoughts on Boston and Atlanta? Love them both. Boston's a little bit over-owned on FanDuel, but still look really good. Atlanta, to me, under-owned and a team that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I ended up capping Boston because I didn't know what else to do. I was just getting such an outrageous amount of them and became difficult to really get to anything else on this slate. So one-offs, make sure you don't get to Boston because they're just all going to be individually 20% plus. Get off of them.
Well, that's it, man. 7:04 and a couple of additional seconds, and we are locked. There we go.
Yeah.
Make sure you're hitting that like button on your way out the door. Eric, anything else before we get out of here?
No, fantasy football coming soon. Make sure you're checking out all that content. Check out the Draft Wingman if you haven't had a chance to do that. Josh did an amazing preview show yesterday. It's up on the site, so go check that out. It makes life so much easier to be able to draft your year-longs, your best balls. One of the best tools out there, under $15 right now. Check it out.
Going to be doing another one Thursday afternoon at 2:00.
Nice.
So keep your eyes peeled for that. But that's all I got. I'm going to go eat. It's not going to be a 30-piece nugget, but I really wish it was. Maybe next time the wife is out of town, I might go for the full 60. We'll try to get real weird. 2,000 calories. What up? Good luck tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you're back for chalk eating. Make sure you're back for everything else that's really fun here at Awesemo. Later, everybody.